Miss, wake up. You've been here all night, Jonathan Whitmore said in a low voice. A hand touched Annie's shoulder lightly. Annie jerked awake. She's first movement was not to fix her hair or wipe the sleep from her face. It was to grab at the papers in her lap. Jonathan Whitmore stepped back when she did. He raised both hands a little to show he meant no harm. Hey, young lady, he said. Softer now. Wake up. You're about to lose something priceless. Annie looked down. 3 envelopes had almost slipped from her fingers. One was hanging halfway over her knee, its white corner pointed toward the dirty floor. She snatched it back and pulled all 3 against her chest, as if Jonathan had reached for her lungs instead of a letter. Who are you? She whispered. Her voice cracked from sleep and dehydration. She pushed herself deeper into the corner of the cold plastic bench. Jonathan took another step back. A small, tired smile crossed his face. I'm not a thief. I just saved 3 tickets to a different life from this filthy floor. His eyes moved to the letterheads before he could stop himself. Harvard, Stanford, MIT, full scholarships? He raised an eyebrow, and this time his surprise was impossible to hide. What kind of genius falls asleep in a hospital hallway holding all that? Annie stared at him. Her eyes were red, guarded. Then she looked down at the envelopes, now wrinkled from the force of her grip. For a moment, something like pride passed across her face. It vanished almost immediately. Genius? She gave a dry laugh that had no humor in it. In this place, these 3 pieces of paper aren't worth as much as 1 bottle of antibiotics. Jonathan stopped smiling. There were answers people gave because they were bitter, and there were answers people gave because life had made them accurate. Annie's sounded like the second kind. He glanced toward the double doors at the end of the hall. You waiting for someone? Annie nodded. My mother. Evelyn Carter. Room 318. Before Jonathan could ask more, a nurse came from the nurse's station carrying a clipboard. Oh, thank goodness you're still here, Annie, the nurse said. Your mother's lab results have been delayed another hour. Dr. Morrison will come by when they're back. Her eyes moved to the bench. You can sit here, honey, but you can't lie down and sleep across the seats. I'm sorry. It's hospital policy. Annie sat straighter at once. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I know you weren't. The nurse's voice softened. You've been here since yesterday evening. Nobody thinks you're causing trouble. I'll check on your mama again in a bit, she said. Try to stay sitting up, all right? Yes, ma'am. The nurse touched her arm lightly, then walked away. Just then, the quick strike of high heels against tile cut through the tense quiet of the hallway. There you are, sir, she said, lowering her head slightly before he even stopped walking. I finally found you. She glanced at the folder, already opening it, and did not seem to notice Annie at all. If you don't mind, there's something you need to review before the board packet goes out, the legal team said. Jonathan's brow tightened. He lifted one hand. Lettre claire. The assistant froze. Sir, I understand, but this is, I said later. Jonathan's voice dropped, and the hallway seemed to drop with it. Claire closed the folder at once. Her face changed, all urgency turning into caution. Of course, sir. Annie watched the exchange without moving. She had known this man was wealthy from his suit, but now she understood something else. Wealth opened doors. Power made people stop talking in the middle of a sentence. Jonathan turned slightly. Go down to the car and wait for me. Take the folder with you. Claire nodded. Only then did her eyes move to Annie. It was brief, almost accidental, the kind of look people gave to furniture in a room they were passing through. Then she looked away, clutched the folder, and walked back toward the elevators. Jonathan stayed where he was. Part of him knew he should leave. But he could not stop looking at the girl with Harvard, Stanford, and MIT crushed against her chest. Annie noticed. What? She asked. Jonathan looked at her face again. Have you eaten? She blinked, caught off guard by the ordinary question. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. And I didn't ask you anything. Jonathan accepted the answer with a nod. Fair enough. Annie shifted as if to stand, then swayed. It was slight, but he saw it. The test results won't be back for another hour, Jonathan said, pointing toward the end of the hallway. The cafeteria should still be open. Would you like a cup of coffee? My pocket can handle 1 hot Americano. Annie almost refused. Then her stomach answered before she could. It made a low, embarrassing sound in the quiet hallway. Color rose in her cheeks. Jonathan looked away, giving her the dignity of pretending he had not heard. "All right," she said. "One coffee. But I pay for mine. I don't take handouts." Jonathan nodded. "I didn't offer one." She studied him for another second, still unsure. "I'm Jonathan," he said, leaving off the last name. "Annie," she replied. "Annie Carter." He gave a small nod, as if the name mattered because it belonged to her, not because he might one day see it on a contract, a scholarship list, or a headline. They walked toward the elevators with space between them. Annie kept the envelopes pressed to her chest. Jonathan kept his hands where she could see them. Behind them, the plastic bench sat empty under the hospital lights, cold again, waiting for the next person too tired to make it home. The elevator arrived with a soft chime that felt too clean for the hour. Annie stepped in first, still holding the envelopes against her chest. The cafeteria sat beyond a set of double doors, half lit, with only one register open. Behind the counter, an older woman with reading glasses hanging from a chain looked up from wiping a tray. "You folks are lucky," she said. "Coffee's still hot. Food's tired, but coffee's hot." "That's all we need," Jonathan said. Annie reached into the pocket of her hoodie before he could move. The cashier looked at the money, then at Annie's face, and said, "Coffee's $2 after midnight, sweetheart. Hospital special." Annie gave her a small nod. "Thank you, ma'am." Jonathan ordered the same thing, black. Jonathan took a slow sip of coffee and grimaced. That woman oversold it. Annie glanced at him. "You said it would be hot. You didn't say it would be good." "That's fair." For the first time, the corner of Annie's mouth moved like it remembered how to almost smile. It did not last. But Jonathan saw it and was careful not to chase it away. "So," he said, "Annie Carter, what did you do to make 3 schools like that fight over you?" "They didn't fight. They don't hand out full scholarships because they're bored." She looked down at the cup. "I had good grades, test scores, science fairs, some coding competitions. That sounds like the version you give adults who ask too many questions." Annie studied him over the rim of her coffee. "You always talk like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're opening a locked drawer." Jonathan set his cup down. "Occupational hazard." "What occupation?" He paused just long enough for her to notice. "Healthcare technology." "That's broad." "It is." She did not push. Not yet. People with money rarely answered the first question honestly. Annie had learned that from landlords, billing clerks, and men who said they wanted to help but started by asking what she was willing to give up. Jonathan nodded toward the envelopes. "What do you want to study?" "Biomedical engineering, maybe computational biology after that." She said it quickly, like someone naming a street she had memorized but was no longer allowed to walk down. "I want to build systems that help hospitals predict what they'll need before people suffer from what they don't have." Jonathan leaned back. The answer was not rehearsed. That made it land harder. "You've thought about this." "I've lived around it." "Tell me." Annie gave a short breath. "Most hospitals waste money because they react late. Supplies sit where they aren't needed. Medication expires in one place while another clinic waits 3 days for the same thing. Poor neighborhoods get delays first because nobody calls it a crisis until somebody important is waiting." Jonathan did not interrupt. "In high school, I built a routing model," she said. "It started as a science fair project. Then I kept working on it. It uses patient flow, prescription trends, weather delays, warehouse inventory, and transportation routes to predict where critical supplies should be moved before the shortage happens." "What's it called?" "Pulse route." The name came out quietly, but not weakly. There was pride in it, guarded but alive. Jonathan's eyes narrowed a little, not in suspicion, in recognition. "You built that yourself?" "Yes." "What language?" "Python first, then some JavaScript for the dashboard. I used public hospital data where I could, simulated the rest, and built a small model using clinic patterns from Wayne County." Jonathan forgot the coffee. "And it works?" "It worked well enough to win state." She looked away. "Not well enough to pay for dialysis." He let the silence sit. The cafeteria hummed around them. A refrigerator clicked on behind the counter. Somewhere near the lobby, an elevator opened and closed. "Which school are you choosing?" Jonathan asked. Annie's face changed before she answered, not dramatically. The light simply went out of her eyes, as if someone had reached inside and turned a switch. I'm not going. Jonathan heard the words, but they made no sense beside the envelopes on the table. You're deferring? No. Taking a gap year? No. He looked at the letters again. Annie, those are full scholarships. Tuition, she said. Not everything. Not life. Not my mother's medication. Not the rent. Not the part of the bill the hospital says isn't covered. Not the rides when she's too weak for the bus. She has insurance? Annie laughed once under her breath. She has enough insurance for people to say, she has insurance. Jonathan looked down at his coffee. My mother worked in hospital laundry for 16 years, Annie said. Sheets, gowns, towels, all of it. She used to come home smelling like bleach. Said it meant she had done honest work. Then her kidneys started failing. She kept working until her legs swelled so bad she couldn't get her shoes on. Annie rubbed her thumb over the edge of the MIT envelope. Now every week is a bill. Every month is a warning. Every phone call starts with someone saying they understand. Jonathan knew that phrase. He had heard it in customer service trainings, patient assistance scripts, public relations statements. We understand. It was the cheapest sentence in American healthcare. My mom keeps telling me to go, Annie said. She says she didn't raise me to sit in hospital hallways. But she says that from a hospital bed. So what am I supposed to do with that? Jonathan had no good answer. For once, he knew better than to reach for a bad one. Annie reached into her backpack and pulled out another folder, thinner than the college envelopes, printed on cheaper paper. She did not hand it to him. She only set it on the table between them. I got an offer for Pulse Route. Jonathan looked at the top page. From who? Brightpath Innovations. The name entered the air quietly. Jonathan's hand stopped halfway to the folder. Annie did not notice at first. She was staring at the contract like it had already taken something from her. $12,000. If I sign over all rights by tomorrow evening, they wire the money in 48 hours. That buys medication, clears enough of the balance to keep treatment moving, maybe gives us a month where my mother can sleep without pretending she isn't scared. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Brightpath Innovations was not just familiar. It was inside his world, tucked under a subsidiary chain, a company he remembered from a quarterly acquisition report. Efficient, low risk, high upside. That was how Richard Sloan had described it. Annie finally looked up. What? He recovered too late. Nothing. No, that was something. Jonathan sat very still. The cafeteria suddenly felt colder than the hallway. 12,000 for all rights? And a non-compete, 10 years. She gave another dry laugh. Apparently I'm valuable enough to silence, just not valuable enough to pay. Don't sign it. The words came out sharper than he intended. Annie's eyes hardened. That's easy to say when your mother isn't upstairs waiting on a number. Jonathan absorbed that because it was true. She gathered the contract and slid it back into her bag. People keep telling me what not to do. Don't quit school. Don't sell the algorithm. Don't panic. Don't give up. She looked toward the ceiling, toward the floors above them. Nobody tells me how to keep my mother alive while I'm being smart. If you can feel Annie's pain in this moment, please give this video a like. She is not just a girl holding 3 elite university letters. She is a daughter being forced to choose between her future and her mother's life. And if you're still watching Annie's story with us, comment where you're watching from. You never know. Someone near you may be watching this same story right now. Jonathan looked at the 3 letters, then at the girl across from him. A few hours ago, those envelopes had been curiosities. Now they were evidence. He said quietly, "Your mind belongs in a lab." Annie looked at him, tired beyond politeness. "Right now it belongs wherever my mother's bill says it has to be." A hospital announcement crackled through the ceiling speaker, calling Dr. Morrison to renal care. Annie stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "That's my mom's doctor." She grabbed the envelopes in her coffee, forgetting the lid. Some spilled over her fingers, but she did not flinch. Jonathan rose with her. "You don't have to come," she said. "I know," but he followed anyway, a few steps behind, carrying the napkins she had forgotten, while the name Brightpath beat in his mind like a warning he should have heard long before Annie Carter ever sat across from him in a hospital cafeteria. They reached the third floor with Annie half a step ahead, moving fast enough that Jonathan could see the effort in it. Her shoulders were squared, but her legs did not trust her. The coffee had spilled across 2 fingers, leaving a red patch near her knuckles. She wiped it once against her hoodie and kept walking. Dr. Helen Morrison stood outside room 318 with a tablet in one hand and reading glasses low on her nose. She was a small woman in her early 60s, gray hair cut short, the kind of doctor who did not waste movement because too many people were waiting for her. When she saw Annie, her face softened before her mouth did. "Annie," she said, "your mother is awake." Annie stopped. "Is it bad?" Dr. Morrison did not answer too quickly. That was how Annie knew it was not simple. Doctors had different silences. Some meant they were choosing gentle words. Some meant they were deciding how much truth a person could stand at that hour. "She's stable right now," Dr. Morrison said. "But the labs show her potassium is still higher than we want, and her creatinine is climbing again. We're adjusting medication, and she'll need dialysis this morning. I want to keep her at least another day." Annie looked through the small window in the door. Her mother was lying under a thin blanket, face turned toward the wall, one hand resting above the sheet. Even from outside, Evelyn Carter looked like a woman trying not to let her daughter see how tired she was. "How much?" Annie asked. Dr. Morrison's eyes flicked to Jonathan for the first time. She recognized him. Of course she did. Everyone in the building knew the man whose name was going on the new renal wing, but unlike the administrators downstairs, she did not straighten or smile. "Let's talk about the medical part first," she said. "That means it's a lot. It means I'm your mother's doctor, not the billing office." Annie gave a short nod, but her jaw tightened. "The billing office always finds me." Dr. Morrison said nothing because there was nothing false in it. She touched Annie's elbow. "She's been asking for you." Annie stepped into the room. Jonathan remained in the hall, but Dr. Morrison looked at him as if measuring whether he had the right to be there. He did not. He knew that. Still, something held him near the doorway. Inside, the room was small, with a curtain drawn halfway around the bed and a television mounted high on the wall with the sound off. A plastic bag of Evelyn's clothes sat on a chair. On the rolling table beside the bed were a cup of ice chips, a church bulletin folded open to a prayer list, and a stack of papers turned face down as if shame could be hidden by flipping it over. "Baby," Evelyn whispered. Annie crossed the room and took her mother's hand. "I'm here." "You ate?" Annie almost smiled. "You're in the hospital and you're asking me that?" That wasn't an answer. "I had coffee." Evelyn closed her eyes. "Lord, give me patience with this child." "It was hot coffee." "That does not make it food." Jonathan heard the exchange from the doorway and felt something twist in him. His mother had been dead for 14 years, but for a second he could hear her voice through Evelyn's. Not the words, exactly. The instinct. A mother could be weak enough to need machines and still worry whether her child had eaten. Evelyn opened her eyes and noticed him. Her gaze sharpened. Illness had thinned her face, but not her judgment. "Who was that?" Annie glanced back. "Jonathan. He bought coffee. I paid for mine," Annie added quickly, as if that mattered to her mother as much as it mattered to herself. Evelyn studied him. "Jonathan who?" Jonathan stepped just inside the room. "Jonathan Whitmore, ma'am." Something passed through Evelyn's face. Recognition, then restraint. She had seen his name on plaques and brochures, maybe on the television in the waiting room, when the hospital announced another donation, but she did not look grateful. She looked cautious. "Well," she said, voice dry, "that explains the suit at 3 in the morning." Jonathan accepted that with a small nod. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn's eyes moved to Annie's chest, where the envelopes were still pressed tight. "You still carrying those letters around like a shield?" Annie looked down. "Mama, don't mama me." Evelyn shifted, wincing before she could hide it. Annie immediately leaned forward, but Evelyn squeezed her hand to stop her. "I asked you a question. They're just letters." "They are not just letters. They are the door I prayed over before it opened." Annie's face hardened in the way children's faces harden when love asks them to do something impossible. "A door doesn't help if I can't walk through it." "You can." "No, I can't. Not with you here." Evelyn turned her head on the pillow and looked at her daughter for a long moment. "Listen to me, Annie Carter. I worked laundry in this hospital for 16 years. I folded sheets until my hands cracked. I cleaned other people's stains. I came home smelling like bleach and heat and that old basement steam. I did that because I believed work was supposed to carry a child farther than it carried the parent. Annie's eyes filled, but she did not let the tears fall. You think I don't know what you did. I think you know it wrong. Evelyn's voice was weak, but there was iron in it. You look at my work and think it means you owe me your life. That is not what it means. It means I already gave you what I could, and now you are supposed to go. And if I go and something happens to you, something is already happening to me. The sentence landed hard. Even the monitor seemed louder after it. Annie looked away. Don't say that. It is the truth. We do not get to love each other by lying. Evelyn drew a slow breath. You are 18. You got letters from schools I have only seen on television. You built something on that old laptop that sounds like it belongs in a hospital boardroom, not on our kitchen table next to overdue bills. And you are sitting here trying to trade all of that for one more month of me sleeping easier. Annie wiped her face with the heel of her hand. What else am I supposed to do? Evelyn's fingers tightened around hers. Not disappear. Jonathan lowered his eyes. The word found him before he was ready for it. Disappear. He had spent years in rooms where people disappeared into categories. Patients, consumers, users, labor, underserved populations, emerging markets. Words smooth enough to cover the person underneath. Annie pulled one of the envelopes free and laid it on the blanket. Harvard. Then another. Stanford. Then the third. MIT. The names looked almost rude in that room. Too clean, too bright beside the IV line and the cup of ice chips. They don't pay for you, Annie said. No school can pay for everything worth keeping, Evelyn said. That does not mean you throw the school away. There's an offer, Annie said, quieter now. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. What offer? Annie hesitated. Annie. For Pulse Route. A company wants to buy it. How much? 12,000. Evelyn stared at her. Then, with the little strength she had, she turned her face toward the ceiling. Jesus, it could help now. It could steal later. Mama, we need money now. Evelyn looked back at her. Who told you your mind was only worth the size of my bill? Annie had no answer. Her mouth trembled once, and she pressed it closed. Evelyn's voice dropped. Baby, if you sell your mind to save my body, neither of us will be free. The room went still. Jonathan felt the words move through him with a force no board presentation had ever carried. They were not dramatic. They were not polished. They were what truth sounded like when spoken by someone with nothing left to protect except the future of her child. Dr. Morrison stood in the doorway now. She had returned quietly, chart in hand, and had heard enough to know not to interrupt. Her gaze shifted from Evelyn to Annie, then to Jonathan. There was something in her eyes he did not like because it looked too much like accusation without needing to become one. Annie bent over her mother's hand. For the first time since Jonathan had found her on the bench, she looked exactly 18. I'm scared, she said. Evelyn lifted her free hand with effort and placed it on Annie's head. I know. I don't know how to do both. You are not supposed to carry the whole world just because the world keeps handing you pieces of it. Annie cried then, quietly, without covering her face. Evelyn stroked her hair the way mothers do when their hands have very little strength left but still remember the motion. Jonathan stepped back into the hall. He had no right to watch more. Dr. Morrison followed him out and pulled the door almost closed. She's brilliant, he said, because it was the safest true thing. Dr. Morrison looked at him. Yes, and that is not what makes this wrong. He said nothing. She should be choosing dorms and classes, the doctor continued. Instead, she's learning which medication her mother can skip without dying too quickly. That is not a failure of character. It is a failure of design. Jonathan looked toward the room. Through the narrow gap, he could see Annie's hand resting over the 3 letters. Dr. Morrison lowered her voice. People like you build wings. You put names on walls. That helps. Sometimes. But a hospital bill can bury a body. Sometimes it buries a future first. Jonathan felt the name Brightpath rise again in his mind. Efficient, low risk, high upside. He looked down at his hands. Hands that had signed acquisitions, pricing structures, distribution agreements. Hands that had never held those papers while a mother begged a daughter not to become the cost of keeping her alive. Inside the room, Evelyn coughed, and Annie reached for the water before the sound finished. Jonathan turned toward the elevators. He did not know yet what he would do, but he knew what he could no longer do. He could no longer pretend he had only met a tired girl in a hallway. By the time Annie got home, the morning had already turned gray. Detroit looked different after a night in the hospital. The houses on her block seemed lower, the sidewalks longer, the old maple trees tired of holding up their branches. A school bus hissed at the corner, taking children somewhere they still believed the day had room for them. Annie stood at her front steps for a moment with her backpack on one shoulder and the 3 college envelopes tucked under her arm, trying to remember when she had last walked through that door without counting something in her head. The house was small, 1 story, brick faded by weather and years of making do. Her mother had bought it with help from Annie's grandfather before the factories started closing and before every block seemed to lose one good family at a time. The porch rail leaned slightly to the left. A plastic chair sat near the door, the kind older neighbors used in summer to watch the street and call out to children by their full names when they were acting foolish. Mrs. Wilkes from next door was already outside in a robe and house slippers, sweeping leaves that would be back by noon. "You just getting in, baby?" Mrs. Wilkes called. "Yes, ma'am." "How's your mama?" Annie paused with the key in the lock. The honest answer was too heavy for the porch. "They're keeping her another day." Mrs. Wilkes stopped sweeping. "You eatin'?" Annie almost laughed. In her neighborhood, that question carried more love than any speech. "I'm about to." "That means no." Mrs. Wilkes pointed the broom at her. "I got oatmeal on the stove. Don't make me bring it over and embarrass you." "I'm okay, ma'am, thank you." "Child, okay is what people say when they don't want help." Mrs. Wilkes stared at her for another second, then softened. "I'll put some in a container. You can pretend you made it." Annie nodded because she did not have the strength to keep refusing. "Thank you." Inside, the house smelled faintly of laundry soap, old wood, and the lavender candle Evelyn lit every Sunday after church. The kitchen table was covered with the life Annie had been trying to keep from collapsing. Prescription bottles, a bus schedule, a half-empty box of saltine crackers, a calculator, hospital discharge instructions from the last visit, and a stack of bills turned face down as if that made them less real. She set the college envelopes beside the pill organizer and stood there looking at them. Harvard, Stanford, MIT. 3 doors on a table that also held a bottle of blood pressure medication they had stretched 2 days longer than prescribed. Her laptop sat near the sink, plugged into an outlet that sometimes sparked if the cord moved the wrong way. Annie opened it, waded through the slow startup, and clicked into the folder labeled Pulse Route Final, though nothing about it felt final. Code filled the screen, lines and logic she understood better than most adults understood their own excuses. She had built the first version at midnight on this same table while her mother slept in the next room, the dryer running in the basement because the noise helped Annie focus. Back then, it had been a science fair project. Then she started reading hospital supply reports, public health data, delays in clinic shipments, pharmacy shortages in Wayne County, weather interruptions, bus routes, refill patterns. She saw waste in one place and absence in another, and the distance between the two made her angry enough to build something. The doorbell rang before she could open the contract. Calvin Brooks stood on the porch holding a grocery bag in one hand and his phone in the other. He was 19, tall and narrow, with an old tiger's cap pulled low over his forehead. They had been friends since 7th grade, back when he beat her in a robotics challenge, and she spent the next 2 years making sure it never happened again. "My mom made food," he said. "Chicken, green beans, cornbread. She said if you don't take it, she's coming herself." Annie stepped aside. "Everybody's threatening me with food today. That's Detroit love. Take the plate or face consequences." He walked into the kitchen and stopped when he saw the table. His eyes moved from the bills to the envelopes to the laptop. He did not joke then. "You went back to that contract?" "I'm looking at it. That's not the same as not signing it." Annie pulled the chair out and sat. "Calvin." "No, don't Calvin me." He put the grocery bag on the counter and came around the table. "Bright Path is robbing you with stationery. You know that, right? They're offering cash in 48 hours. They're offering panic money. There's a difference." Annie opened the email. The contract appeared on the screen, black text on white pages, clean and polite and dangerous. "My mother needs medication. The hospital wants payment. The pharmacy doesn't accept potential. Pulse Route could be worth millions. Not today." She looked at him. "Today it's worth what someone will wire before my mother gets worse." Calvin leaned over the laptop, jaw tight. "Listen to what you just said." That's how they get people. They wait until the house is on fire, then offer to buy the land. Annie stared at the screen. You got a better offer hiding in that bag with the cornbread? He had no answer. That hurt them both. Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, then remembered hospitals loved unknown numbers and fear answered before pride could stop her. Hello? Annie Carter? The man's voice was smooth, businesslike, almost warm. This is Mason Reed from Bright Path Innovations. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Calvin mouthed. Don't. Annie turned away from him. I have a minute. Good. I wanted to follow up on our offer. Our review team remains very impressed with Pulse Route. For someone your age, the work is remarkable. For someone your age, she hated the phrase at once. Thank you, she said. That said, we do need to move quickly. The $12,000 offer is still available, but only until 5 p.m. tomorrow. After that, the budget may be reallocated. Annie closed her eyes. I understand. I also understand from your intake form that there are medical circumstances in your family. I'm sorry about that, truly. His pause was practiced. Situations like yours are exactly why our fast payment structure can be so helpful. Most companies take months. We can wire funds in 48 hours. Calvin whispered, Predator. Annie covered the phone. Stop. Mason continued as if he had not heard anything. Your mother doesn't have the luxury of waiting, Annie. The kitchen changed around her. The refrigerator hum seemed to fade. The bills on the table, the pill bottles, the envelopes, the laptop, Calvin's angry face. All of it narrowed to that one sentence. It was cruel, because it was shaped like concern. What did you say? Annie asked. I said timing matters. I don't want you to lose an opportunity because of hesitation. No, she said quietly. You don't want to lose a bargain. There was the smallest pause on the line. I'm trying to help you make a practical decision. I'll review the contract. Of course. Just remember the deadline. The call ended. Annie lowered the phone slowly. Calvin stood across from her, his face tight. Please tell me that made you mad enough not to sign. It made me mad, she said. It didn't make my mother less sick. She opened the contract again. The words blurred for a second, then steadied. Assignment of all rights. Perpetual ownership. Non-compete. Confidentiality. No future claims. No royalties. No obligation to credit original developer. It was all there, written in language so calm it almost looked harmless. Mrs. Wilkes knocked once and came in without waiting, carrying a plastic container of oatmeal wrapped in a dish towel. She saw Calvin, the laptop, the papers, and Annie's face. Older women did not need explanations for every kind of trouble. She set the oatmeal on the table. Eat while you think. Annie looked up. I'm not hungry. Mrs. Wilkes took the spoon from the dish towel and placed it in Annie's hand. That's all right, eat anyway. No one spoke for a while. Annie took one bite because refusing would have been harder than chewing. The oatmeal was warm, with cinnamon and a little brown sugar, the way Evelyn made it when there was enough sugar to spare. That almost broke her. Calvin sat down across from her. Let me call Mr. Daniels from the Science Fair Board. Maybe he knows somebody. By tomorrow? Maybe. And if maybe isn't fast enough? He looked down. Annie reached for the pen beside the laptop. It was a cheap blue pen from the hospital billing office. Detroit Mercy General printed on the side in white letters. She rolled it between her fingers and thought about her mother upstairs saying, Who told you your mind was only worth the size of my bill? The pen weighed almost nothing. Still, when Annie set its tip above the signature line, her hand began to shake. Somewhere in the house, the old wall clock ticked. Outside, Mrs. Wilkes's broom scraped the porch again. Life went on with a stubbornness that felt almost insulting. Annie did not sign. Not yet. She capped the pen and placed it beside the contract, close enough to threaten her, far enough to let her breathe. Then she picked up the Harvard envelope and tried to smooth the crease Jonathan had seen in the hospital hallway. The paper did not flatten. Some things, once bent under pressure, kept the mark. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from the hospital. Dr. Morrison wants you back when you can. Your mother is asking for you. Annie stood so quickly the chair hit the wall. Calvin grabbed the food bag and her backpack. She gathered the 3 envelopes, then hesitated over the contract. After a moment, She folded it once and shoved it into the bag too. She did not know whether she was carrying a lifeline or a trap. She only knew both had her name on them. Jonathan did not go back to the hospital board. Claire Bennett was waiting beside the black sedan at the curb when he came through the automatic doors. The folder was still in her arms, pressed flat against her navy jacket as if she had been holding her breath with it. The driver straightened, but Jonathan waved him off and opened the rear door himself. "Sir," Claire began. "The board packet." "Not now." She stopped. A few hours earlier, his tone in the hallway had made her retreat. This time there was no anger in it. That was what unsettled her. Jonathan Whitmore irritated was familiar. Jonathan Whitmore quiet meant something had moved beneath the surface. He got into the car. Claire slid in on the other side, still holding the folder. "Where to?" the driver asked. "The Westin," Jonathan said. Claire turned. "Not the office?" "The hotel first." She looked at him through the dim light of the car. "Is this about the girl?" Jonathan did not answer right away. Outside the window, Detroit was waking in pieces. A bus sighed at the curb. A man in a work jacket crossed the street carrying a lunch pail. Near the hospital entrance, an older woman leaned on a cane and waited for a ride that had not come yet. "What do we own under Bright Path Innovations?" Jonathan asked. Claire blinked. "Bright Path?" "Yes. I'd have to pull the file." "Pull it." She opened her laptop at once, balancing it on her knees as the car moved away from the hospital. Her fingers worked quickly. Jonathan watched the city slide by. Brick buildings, closed storefronts, a church sign with missing letters, a mural of a black child holding a book. He thought of Annie Carter standing in her kitchen with a pen over a signature line he had not seen but could imagine. He thought of Evelyn in room 318 asking who told her daughter that her mind was only worth the size of a bill. Claire cleared her throat. Bright Path Innovations is part of Whitmore Applied Systems, acquired 3 years ago. Structured under the Intellectual Property Development Division, Richard Sloan oversees the financial review. Legal reports to Marbury's team. What do they do? Claire read from the summary. Early stage acquisition of software tools, predictive models, workflow systems, and healthcare. Adjacent intellectual property from independent developers, mostly small contracts. Low upfront cost, high commercialization potential. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Say that without the brochure." Claire looked up. He kept his eyes on the window. "Claire, they buy ideas before larger companies notice them," she said. "Often from people who don't have representation." The honesty came out reluctantly, but it came. Jonathan respected her for that and hated the answer. "What's the average purchase price?" "Across all contracts," she scrolled. "Looks like between $8,000 and $25,000 for early-stage tools. Some royalty structures, but mostly buyouts. Non-competes?" Claire hesitated. "Common. How long?" 5 to 10 years. Jonathan closed his eyes for half a second. $12,000. All rights. 10 years. Apparently I'm valuable enough to silence. Just not valuable enough to pay. "Send the full Bright Path acquisition history to my private drive," he said. "Not the board folder, mine." "Yes, sir." "And don't copy Sloan." That made her stop typing. "Sir?" He turned then. "Did I ask something unclear?" "No." She returned to the laptop. "I'll send it directly." At the hotel, Jonathan went straight to his suite without removing his coat. Claire followed him inside and placed the folder on the desk, but he was already opening his laptop. The room had a view of downtown Detroit, the kind hotels sold to men who wanted to feel near a city without having to hear it. Dawn was thinning the sky behind the buildings. Everything looked softer from up high. That had always been the danger. The Bright Path files arrived in batches. Contracts, acquisition memos, valuation notes, developer profiles. Jonathan opened the first spreadsheet and stared at the rows. Names, ages, zip codes, product descriptions, offer amounts, projected enterprise value. At the far right was a column labeled Strategic Upside. He scrolled. A 22-year-old from Cleveland. $9,000 for a medication adherence app. A community college student from Atlanta. $15,000 for a clinic scheduling model. 2 brothers from Newark. $18,000 for a home care logistics tool. A girl from Fresno, 19 Spanish surname, $12,000 for a bilingual patient intake system. Fast close. No counsel indicated. Full assignment. No royalty. Non-compete enforced. The words repeated until they stopped looking like language and started looking like fingerprints. Claire stood near the door, silent. Jonathan opened the newest intake report. There it was. Annie Carter, Detroit, Michigan, age 18. Product, Pulse Route, Predictive Medical Supply Routing Model. Proposed purchase, $12,000. Rights, full assignment. Royalty, none. Restrictive covenant, 10 years. Urgency factors, family medical debt, pending college enrollment, immediate liquidity need. He read the last phrase twice. Immediate liquidity need. That was what they had called Evelyn Carter's failing kidneys. That was what they had called a girl sitting beside a hospital bed, choosing between her mother's medication and 3 college letters. Not fear, not love, not desperation. Liquidity. Jonathan stood so abruptly the chair rolled back and struck the wall. Claire flinched. Get Richard on the phone. It's barely 6. He'll answer, she called. He did. Richard Sloane's voice came through the speaker, calm and dry, the voice of a man who had already read 3 market briefings before breakfast. Jonathan. Early morning. Tell me about Bright Path. A pause. Not long, but Jonathan heard the calculation in it. What specifically? All of it. Bright Path is performing well. Small line item, strong upside. It gives us access to early-stage innovation without the cost burden of venture incubation. We've discussed this. I'm asking what we do to the people we buy from. Richard gave a soft sigh. We offer liquidity to independent developers. Many of them would never commercialize otherwise. You mean they're poor? I mean they lack capital. You mean they don't have lawyers? I mean they are often pre-institutional. Jonathan stared at Annie's intake report on the screen. Pre-institutional. That's a clean word. It's an accurate one. An 18-year-old girl in Detroit is about to sign away a medical supply algorithm for $12,000 because her mother is in renal failure upstairs at Mercy General. Another pause. Richard's voice cooled. I assume this is no longer hypothetical. No. Then we should be careful. Direct involvement could create exposure, especially if you've had personal contact. Jonathan almost laughed. Exposure. Not harm. Not injustice. Exposure. The risk, in Richard's mind, was not what had happened to Annie. The risk was that Jonathan had seen it. Is Pulse Route worth more than $12,000? Jonathan asked. I haven't reviewed it personally. Then review it now. Jonathan, these early-stage concepts are speculative. That wasn't what I asked. Richard was silent just long enough to show irritation. If the model performs as described, yes, it could be worth substantially more after development. How much more? Potentially 7 figures. More if integrated into our distribution network. Claire looked up from her laptop. Jonathan sat slowly. And we were going to pay her $12,000. We were going to assume the risk of development. We were going to buy her panic. Richard's voice sharpened. That is not a useful way to frame a business transaction. It is if it's true. Jonathan, you're reacting to a story. I understand the emotional pull, but one girl in a hospital hallway cannot become the basis for corporate policy. Jonathan looked toward the window. Down below, traffic thickened. People were going to work. Some of them would pack medicine they could not afford. Some would clean hospital rooms where they themselves could not pay to be treated. Some would raise children smart enough to change the world and still have to sell the change at a discount. She's not one girl, Jonathan said. Then what is she? Jonathan looked back at Annie's file, at the phrase immediate liquidity need, at his company's logo on the top of the page. She's the first one I was close enough to see. Richard exhaled through the line. What do you want? Everything. Bright Path contracts for 5 years. Developer demographics. Non-compete enforcement. Revenue generated from acquired tools. Internal valuations versus purchase price. And I want renal pricing reports for Mercy General and all associated clinics. That's a wide request. Yes. For what purpose? Jonathan closed the laptop halfway, then stopped. Annie's name was still visible on the screen. To find out how many futures we've been calling growth. He ended the call before Richard could answer. Claire stood very still. Jonathan turned to her. Cancel breakfast. With the hospital donors? With everyone. And the board packet? Leave it. She nodded, then looked at him more carefully. "What are you going to do?" Jonathan did not answer because the truth was, he did not know yet. He only knew the old answer was no longer available. A check would be easy. A scholarship would be easy. Paying Evelyn Carter's bill would be easy. Easy was the language men like him used when they wanted to feel generous without becoming accountable. He opened the Bright Path report again. Rows of names filled the screen, each one smaller than the prophet it had become. "First," he said, "I'm going to read what I signed." Claire left quietly. Jonathan remained at the desk as the sun rose over Detroit, reading contract after contract while the city brightened beneath the glass. By 7:30, he had taken off his coat. By 8, his coffee had gone cold. By 9, he understood that Bright Path was not a mistake hidden inside his company. It was his company telling the truth about itself in smaller print. At 9:30, Jonathan left the hotel with the Bright Path files loaded onto an encrypted tablet and a headache sitting behind his eyes. He had not slept. He had not changed clothes. Claire walked beside him through the lobby, trying to match his pace while answering messages from people who had been told their morning with him was canceled without explanation. "Legal is asking whether this is an internal audit or a compliance review," she said. Jonathan pushed through the revolving door into the cold Detroit morning. "Tell them it's a question." "What kind of question?" "The kind they should have asked before I did." She looked at him once, then typed without another word. The headquarters of Whitmore MedTech rose 27 floors above Jefferson Avenue, all glass and steel, with a lobby polished enough to reflect the people walking through it. On most mornings, Jonathan barely noticed the security desk, the wall of awards, the framed magazine covers, the screen near the elevators that rotated through phrases like innovation with purpose and care through technology. That morning, each word looked heavier than it had the day before. He wondered how many patients had read them from a hospital bed and believed them. He wondered how many employees had repeated them in meetings while approving the opposite. Claire followed him into the private elevator. "Richard Sloan wants 10 minutes before your review." "No." He said, "There may be context missing." "I'm sure there is. That's why I'm not starting with him." The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. People greeted him, then stopped when they saw his face. Jonathan walked past the conference room where breakfast had been laid out for the donor committee. Coffee, cut fruit, pastries, silver tongs, small plates. No one had touched it yet. He looked at the table and thought of Annie smoothing a folded $5 bill on a hospital cafeteria counter. "Send that food downstairs," he told Claire. "To the staff lounge, to security, custodial, whoever's on shift. Not upstairs." "Yes, sir." 15 minutes later, he was in a records room on the 17th floor with Claire, 2 compliance officers, and a junior attorney named Dana Ruiz, who looked as if she had been pulled from sleep and dropped into a storm. Boxes of older acquisition files sat along one wall. On the conference table were 5 years of Bright Path contracts, developer profiles, valuation memos, and internal notes. Dana adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Whitmore, I want to be clear that I'm not the lead attorney on these. I only handled intake review and closing packets." "That's why you're here," Jonathan said. "You saw the first version before anyone cleaned it up." Dana swallowed. "Yes, sir." He opened Annie Carter's file on the screen and turned it toward her. "Walk me through this." Dana looked at the name. Something in her face tightened. "Pulse route. Predictive routing for medical supply distribution. Strong technical submission. Limited validation. But better than most student projects. Why 12,000? That was the pricing tier. Based on what? Stage, applicant profile, development risk, lack of formal incorporation, absence of counsel, and urgency factors. Jonathan leaned back. "Urgency factors?" Dana looked down. "That's the term in the intake system. What does it mean in English?" Claire stopped typing. Dana drew a breath. "It means the seller needs money quickly." "For what?" "Different reasons. Medical debt, tuition deadlines, eviction, family support, immigration fees, sometimes funeral costs." Jonathan did not move, "And we mark that as useful." Dana's voice dropped. "The system marks it as time sensitive." "That wasn't what I asked." She looked at him then, and for a second he saw not a company lawyer, but a young woman who had known the answer longer than she had allowed herself to say it. "Yes," she said. "It makes them more likely to close." The room went quiet. Jonathan turned a page in the printed summary. Fast, close prospects. Is that Bright Path language? Dana nodded. Who came up with it? I don't know. Who uses it? Another pause. Everyone. Jonathan let the words sit there. Everyone. The most convenient hiding place in any company. He moved to another file. Malik Thompson, 22, Cleveland. Medication adherence app. Sold for $9,000. Internal valuation after acquisition? Claire found the number. Projected at $1.8 million after integration. Was he paid royalties? No. Credit? No. Counsel? Dana answered. Not indicated. He opened the next file. Sofia Alvarez, 19. Fresno. Bilingual. Patient intake system. 12,000. Claire read from the spreadsheet. Projected value, 3.2 million over 5 years. Royalties? No. Counsel? No. Jonathan went through file after file, and the pattern did not break. Poor zip codes. Young developers. Public schools. Community colleges. No attorneys. Medical emergencies. Family debt. Bright Path had not used force. It had used timing. It had found people standing at the edge of a financial cliff and offered cash in exchange for the thing that might have carried them away from it. Dana's hands were folded tight in her lap. For what it's worth, a few of us raised concerns. With whom? Marbury's office first, then finance. We were told the contracts were enforceable and that the sellers received clear disclosure. Did they understand what they were signing? Legally, yes. Jonathan looked at her. That answer is starting to make me sick. Dana nodded once, almost with relief. Me too. Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at it. Richard is outside. Keep him there. A compliance officer named Bell, older, careful, cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, if I may. Bright Path's model is aggressive, but it's not unusual in the industry. A lot of early-stage acquisition works this way. Jonathan turned to him. Does that make it better? Bell hesitated. It makes it defensible. There it is, Jonathan said quietly. Bell's face reddened. Sir? The most expensive word in this building. Defensible. Not decent. Not fair. Not something we'd want done to our own children. Just defensible. No one answered. Jonathan opened Annie's technical appendix. The lines of summary were dense, but not unclear. Pulse route could map patient flow, prescription patterns, clinic supply needs, and distribution routes. It could flag shortages before they happened and reroute inventory from overstocked locations to understocked ones. It could reduce spoilage, missed treatments, and emergency shipments. He had paid consulting firms millions to produce less practical thinking. How did this land in a $12,000 tier? He asked. Dana shook her head. Because she had no company, no patent filing, no attorney, and no leverage. The algorithm was evaluated as promising but vulnerable. Jonathan looked up. Vulnerable? That's the word in the scoring model. He almost laughed. We didn't score the product. We scored the person. Dana did not deny it. Claire looked toward the door again. Richard is insisting. Jonathan stood. Good. Let him insist. He gathered 3 files from the table. Annie Carter, Malik Thompson, Sofia Alvarez. Then he stopped and picked up the whole stack instead. Dana, he said, how many contracts like this? In 5 years? A little over 600. How many under 25? About 60%. How many with no counsel? Most. How many tagged with urgency factors? Dana looked down at her notes. 70. 1%. Jonathan walked to the window. From the 17th floor, Detroit looked manageable, laid out in blocks and traffic lines. From far enough away, every city looked as if someone had designed it with care. He knew better now. Some things only appeared orderly because the people hurt by the order were too far below to be heard. He turned back. I want everyone reviewed, not by Marbury's team, outside counsel, independent. I want demographic breakdowns, payment comparisons, internal valuations, enforcement history, and every communication where urgency was used to pressure a seller. Bell shifted. That could create discoverable material. Jonathan looked at him. Then we'd better make sure what it discovers is the truth. The door opened before Bell could respond. Richard Sloane stepped in without waiting to be invited, silver hair neat, suit perfect, expression composed. His eyes went to the files in Jonathan's hands, then to Dana, then to Claire. "This has gone far enough," Richard said. Jonathan studied him for a moment. "No, Richard, I'm starting to think it hasn't gone nearly far enough." Richard closed the door behind him. "You are turning a manageable contract issue into an institutional crisis." Jonathan placed the stack of files on the table. "No, I'm finding out we built one and named it Opportunity." Richard's jaw tightened. "You need to be careful with that kind of language." Jonathan thought of Annie in the cafeteria, saying her mother's bill decided where her mind belonged. He thought of Evelyn saying neither of us will be free. "For once," he said, "I think the language is finally catching up to what we did." Richard Sloane did not sit. Men like him rarely sat when they meant to win. He stood near the door with one hand in his pocket and the other holding his phone, as if the room were an inconvenience scheduled between more important things. "Jonathan," he said, "I understand you were moved by what you saw at the hospital, but we cannot let a personal encounter rewrite acquisition strategy." Dana Ruiz looked down at the table. Claire stayed still beside the window. Bell pretended to read the top sheet in front of him. Jonathan picked up Annie's file. "A girl is being offered $12,000 for a system our own valuation says could be worth 7 figures. Could," Richard said. "Potentially. After capital, development, legal work, regulatory review, integration, and market testing. We assume the risk. She assumes the loss. She receives immediate payment. Because her mother is sick." Richard's mouth tightened. "That is unfortunate. It is not illegal." Jonathan looked at him for a long moment. "I'm going back to Mercy General." Richard frowned. "For what purpose?" "To understand the other side of this report. The hospital already gave us pricing summaries." "I don't want summaries." "Then take counsel." "No. Jonathan, do not speak casually with patients about pricing, treatment, or corporate responsibility. Anything you say could become discoverable." Jonathan slipped Annie's file into his leather folder. "Good." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Good? If the truth is discoverable, maybe it should be discovered." He walked out before Sloane could answer. Detroit Mercy General looked different in daylight. At 2 in the morning, the hospital had seemed like a place held together by machines and waiting. By late morning, it was busier, louder, more exposed. Ambulances pulled in under the emergency canopy. Families moved through the lobby carrying flowers, fast food bags, blankets, worry. A man in a tiger's jacket argued softly with a billing clerk near the elevators. An older woman sat beside him, holding a prescription bag with both hands and staring at the floor. Jonathan entered through the side door this time, avoiding the donor wall. He did not want to pass his own name. Dr. Helen Morrison met him outside renal care. She wore the same white coat, but now there was coffee in her hand and less patience in her eyes. "I heard you were asking questions," she said. "I need to understand the cost structure for patients like Evelyn Carter." "No," she said. "You need to understand the cost." He accepted the correction. "Then show me." She studied him for a moment. "You came without a photographer. That's a start." "I didn't come for praise." "Good. I wasn't offering any." She led him down the corridor. They passed dialysis chairs separated by curtains, patients sitting under blankets while machines did quiet work beside them. Some watched television without seeing it. Some slept. Some stared ahead with the practiced stillness of people who had learned that illness was not one event but a schedule. "That's Mr. Gaines," Dr. Morrison said, nodding toward an elderly black man in a gray cap. "Retired auto worker. Skips one medication every other week because his copay went up. Says he can feel the difference in his hands. But groceries come first." They kept walking. "That's Mrs. Bellamy. Worked school lunch for 32 years. Her daughter drives her here from the east side because paratransit missed pickup twice. When she misses dialysis, she ends up in the ER. The ER costs more than transportation would, but the system pays for emergencies better than prevention." Jonathan listened. A young man in scrubs passed them pushing a cart of supplies. Dr. Morrison stopped beside a storage room and opened the door. Inside, shelves held boxed tubing, filters, gloves, dialysate, syringes, labels with barcodes, quantities, expiration dates. "Some of this comes through your distribution network," she said. Jonathan looked at the shelves. "I know. No, you know the revenue line." You don't know this. She picked up a small box and turned it in her hand. When the price changes, the hospital shifts cost. When the hospital shifts cost, insurers deny more. When insurers deny more, patients delay. When patients delay, they get sicker. When they get sicker, everybody acts like it was unpredictable. She put the box back. Was Evelyn delaying treatment? Sometimes, not dramatically. That's how poor people survive. They don't announce a collapse. They shave pieces off the plan. Half a dose here, a missed refill there, stretch the bus money, push the follow-up visit, tell the daughter not to worry. Dr. Morrison looked toward room 318. By the time we call it Sirius, they've been negotiating with Sirius for months. Jonathan thought of Annie's notebook. One page for routing models and another for medicine. Buses. Bills. Why wasn't she covered? She has coverage. That's the American magic trick. A person can have insurance and still not have access. Dr. Morrison's voice stayed even, but the anger underneath had roots. The plan covers enough to say she isn't uninsured. It doesn't cover enough to keep her from drowning. They stopped near a small consultation room. Dr. Morrison motioned him inside and closed the door. The room held a round table, 4 chairs, a box of tissues, and a wall poster about kidney health that looked too cheerful for the conversations it witnessed. She set her coffee down. "Why are you really here?" Jonathan opened his folder and took out Annie's BrightPath summary. He laid it on the table, but did not push it toward her. Annie built a system that could improve medical supply routing. BrightPath offered her $12,000 for all rights, 10-year non-compete. Dr. Morrison did not look surprised. That bothered him more than shock would have. "She told me," the doctor said. "She did?" She asked whether $12,000 would keep her mother's treatment stable for a while. Jonathan felt the sentence in his chest. "What did you say?" "I told her I'm a doctor, not a fortune teller. Then I told her not to sign anything without a lawyer. And?" She smiled like I had told her not to bleed without a bandage. Jonathan sat back. Dr. Morrison leaned her forearms on the table. "Do you know what poverty does to intelligence, Mr. Whitmore? It doesn't remove it. It corners it. Annie can understand supply chains, predictive modeling, hospital waste, and algorithmic routing. But this week, all that brilliance is being used to answer one question: how much of herself can she sell before her mother gets worse?" Jonathan said nothing. "You people like the word access," she continued. "Access to care, access to innovation, access to opportunity. But access without affordability is a locked door with a nicer sign." He looked at the tissue box, then the poster, then his own hands. "I can pay Evelyn's bill. I'm sure you can. I can do it today. I'm sure you can do it before lunch." He looked up. Dr. Morrison's face softened, but only slightly. "That would help Evelyn. It would help Annie. I would not tell you not to do it if it were offered the right way. But don't confuse relief with justice." He took that in. She sat back. Charity is what people offer after policy has already failed. The words did not strike loudly. They settled. That was worse. Loud things could fade. Settled things stayed. Jonathan looked through the glass panel in the door. Across the hall, Annie had returned to her mother's room. She was standing beside the bed with her backpack still on, one hand resting on Evelyn's blanket. She looked smaller in daylight, not younger exactly, but more visibly tired. Calvin stood near the wall holding a grocery bag, unsure whether to leave or stay. Evelyn was awake, watching her daughter with a mother's helpless pride. "What happens if Annie leaves for school?" Jonathan asked. "Evelyn will tell her to go. Annie will try. Then every bill, every bad lab, every missed call will pull her back by the throat. And if she doesn't go?" Dr. Morrison looked at Annie through the glass. "Then one day she'll be 35, explaining to some other bright child why dreams are expensive, and she'll do it kindly, because bitterness takes energy she won't have left." Jonathan closed the folder. "I want the actual pricing records for renal medication and supplies tied to this hospital. You'll need authorization. I'll get it. You'll also need someone willing to tell you what the records mean." He met her eyes. "Will you?" Dr. Morrison picked up her coffee and took one slow sip. "I'll tell you what they mean. I won't help you make it sound better." "Good." "No," she said, standing. "Not good. Necessary." Outside the consultation room, Annie looked up as Jonathan stepped into the hall. For a second, their eyes met. She did not wave. She did not smile. She only looked at him as if trying to decide whether he was another man passing through her crisis or someone about to become responsible for what he had seen. Jonathan had no answer he could give her yet, so he gave her the only honest thing he had. He looked away first, not from shame alone, but because he knew shame was useless unless it learned to move. Jonathan left Mercy General with Dr. Morrison's words still working under his skin. Relief was not justice. Charity was what people offered after policy had failed. By noon, those sentences had followed him through 3 calls, 2 canceled meetings, and 1 silent ride across Detroit to a place he had not visited in almost 2 years. Whitmore Pharmaceutical Distribution Center sat near the edge of the city, a long gray building behind a chain-link fence, with loading bays cut into one side like open mouths. Trucks idled along the dock. Men and women in reflective vests moved between pallets, scanners, and shrink-wrapped boxes marked with hospital names. The sign at the entrance carried his company's logo and a slogan Jonathan had approved years ago without much thought, delivering care where it's needed most. He stood in the parking lot and read it twice. Claire got out beside him, tablet in hand. Operations says they weren't expecting you. That was the point. A security guard hurried from the front desk when they entered. Mr. Whitmore, sir. We didn't get notice. I know. Jonathan signed the visitor log himself. Who's managing this shift? Mrs. Alvarez, sir. I'll call her. No need. I'd rather walk. The guard looked uncertain, but Jonathan was already moving toward the warehouse floor. The first thing that hit him was the sound. Conveyor belts, forklifts backing up, scanners chirping, tape guns ripping across cardboard, ventilation fans pushing stale air from one end of the building to the other. Above it all, the lights shone white and flat, making everyone look a little more tired than they probably wanted to admit. A supervisor in a red vest came quickly toward him. She was in her 40s. Hair pulled back. Radio clipped to her shoulder. Mr. Whitmore. Elena Alvarez. I wish someone had told us you were coming. Then I would have seen what you prepared for me, Jonathan said. I need to see what you don't prepare. Elena glanced at Claire, then back at him. All right. Where do you want to start? With the people? She gave a short nod, the kind that said she respected the answer but did not yet trust the man giving it. She led him down the main aisle. Workers moved with practiced speed, scanning labels and stacking boxes for hospital routes across Wayne County. Jonathan saw renal medication, dialysis filters, tubing, syringes, gloves, lab kits. He saw the same supplies Dr. Morrison had shown him that morning. But here they were not beside patients. They were inventory. How many on this shift? He asked. 46. How many full-time? Elena hesitated. Depends how you define it. Jonathan stopped walking. She exhaled. 14 full-time. The rest part-time. How many hours? Most are scheduled 27 to 28 a week. Claire looked up from her tablet. Jonathan kept his eyes on Elena. Why? You know why? He did. That was the shame of it. 30 hours changed a worker's category. 30 hours meant benefits, eligibility, cost. 27.5 meant flexibility. That was the word used upstairs. Flexibility. It sounded better than saying a person could work almost enough to qualify for help, but not quite. Who wants more hours? He asked. Elena looked around the floor. Most of them. And we don't give it. No, sir. Why not? This time she did not soften it. Because the scheduling system flags them before they cross the line. They continued toward the packing stations. A woman in her late 50s stood at table 6, placing renal medication into insulated shipping containers with cold packs. She worked without wasted motion, scanning, checking, sealing, sliding the package down the belt. Her name tag read, Marlene Jackson. Elena lowered her voice. Marlene's one of our best. Been here 5 years. Part-time? 28 hours. Jonathan stepped closer. Miss Jackson? Marlene looked up. Her eyes flicked to Elena, then to Jonathan's suit. She understood hierarchy before anyone named it. Yes, sir? I'm Jonathan Whitmore. I know who you are. There was no admiration in it. No rudeness either. Just the same flat recognition Annie had given him in the hospital. Jonathan was beginning to understand how often his name arrived in a room before he did. Can I ask you something? You can ask. Do you want more hours? Marlene sealed another box. I've asked for more hours 3 times. What happened? They told me there wasn't room in the schedule. Then they hired 6 more part-timers. Elena looked down. Jonathan let that land. Do you have health coverage here? Marlene gave a small laugh. No, sir. I'm not full-time enough to get sick. Claire stopped typing. Marlene glanced at the box in front of her. My husband's got kidney trouble. Not as bad as some, but bad enough. Some of what I pack here goes to clinics like the one he uses. I can tell you the product numbers by heart. I can tell you which boxes need cold packs and which ones can ride dry. I can tell you when a shipment's going to be late just by looking at the dock. She pushed the box down the belt. What I can't do, she said, is afford half of what I touch. Jonathan did not speak. Marlene looked him in the eye then. I pack medicine I can't afford. The sentence did not rise. It did not need to. It sat between the beeping scanners and moving belts like something solid enough to trip over. How long has that been true? Jonathan asked. For people like me, Marlene said. Longer than this building's been standing. Elena shifted but did not interrupt. Jonathan looked at the work table. There was a stool pushed under it, unused. Can you sit during your shift? Not unless there's a medical note. Do you have one? My knees hurt. That's not a note. That's age. A man at the next station, maybe 60, muttered. Amen to that. Marlene gave him a look. Hush, Gerald. Gerald grinned and kept packing. It was a small moment, ordinary, almost warm. That made it worse. These people had built humor inside a system that kept them just below help. They called each other honey, sir, ma'am, brother. They shared cough drops and bus schedules. They knew whose daughter was pregnant, whose rent went up, whose car would not start. The company called them labor units. They called each other by name. Jonathan walked to the break room next. It was too small for 46 people. 6 plastic chairs, 1 microwave, a vending machine, a bulletin board with safety reminders, and a coffee maker stained brown around the pot. On the table sat a lunch bag with a banana, crackers, and a folded napkin. Someone had written Dad on it in blue marker. How long are breaks? Jonathan asked. 15 minutes, Elena said. How many can eat in here at once? She looked at the 6 chairs. You can count. Claire's phone buzzed. She checked it and stepped closer. Richard Sloan is asking why you're at the distribution center. Jonathan looked through the break room window at Marlene packing medicine. Tell him I'm learning what our margins look like in work shoes. Claire typed the message, then hesitated. Exactly that? Exactly that. On the way back across the floor, Jonathan stopped beside a shipment, labeled for Detroit Mercy General. Renal care. Morning delivery. He touched the edge of the box but did not lift it. Somewhere across the city, Evelyn Carter was waiting for medicine that had passed through hands like Marlene's. Somewhere in Annie's backpack, a contract waited to buy the tool that might make this whole system waste less and serve better. And all around him were people moving care through a company that had not cared enough to give them 30 hours. Outside, a truck backed into the loading bay with a long mechanical beep. Jonathan turned to Elena. I want the scheduling records for the last 5 years. Hour caps, benefit eligibility, denied requests for full-time status, turnover, injuries, all of it. Elena studied him. You really want all of it? Yes. It won't look good. Jonathan glanced once more at Marlene, who was sealing another box with steady hands. I'm starting to think looking good is how we avoided doing good, he said. Elena nodded slowly. For the first time, she seemed less cautious, not convinced, but willing to wait and see. As Jonathan walked back toward the exit, the slogan above the door caught his eye again, delivering care where it's needed most. This time he knew the sentence was unfinished. Care was needed here too. Annie returned to Detroit Mercy just after 1 in the afternoon with Calvin beside her and Mrs. Wilkes's food container warm inside her backpack. She had not eaten more than 3 bites. The oatmeal sat heavy in her stomach, not because of the food, but because kindness had weight when you did not know how to repay it. At the front desk, a woman with tired eyes handed her a visitor sticker without asking for ID. Room 318, she said. Your mama's been asking. Annie nodded. She knew the route now without looking, past the gift shop with balloons that cost more than dinner, past the chapel where somebody was always sitting in the back row, past the elevators that smelled faintly of bleach and vending machine coffee. Calvin stayed half a step behind her, holding the grocery bag his mother had packed. He was trying not to act worried. Annie appreciated the effort and hated that he had to make it. Evelyn was awake when they entered, sitting higher in the bed than she had been that morning. Dr. Morrison had ordered dialysis, and the treatment had taken some of the gray from her face but none of the tired from her eyes. "There's my baby," Evelyn said. Annie leaned down and kissed her forehead. "You look better." "I look expensive." Calvin made a small sound like he wanted to laugh but knew better. Evelyn turned her head toward him. "Calvin Brooks, don't stand there like a stranger. Come say hello." "Yes, ma'am." He stepped forward and bent so she could pat his cheek. "You still too skinny." "My mom says the same thing." "Your mama is correct." For a minute, the room held something almost normal. Calvin unpacked the food. Annie found a plastic fork. Evelyn insisted Annie eat first, and Annie pretended to obey by taking a piece of cornbread and breaking it into smaller pieces. Evelyn saw through it but let the lie pass. Mothers kept some arguments for later because they knew later was not promised. A knock came at the door. It was not Dr. Morrison. A woman from patient accounts stood there with a folder held against her chest. "Miss Carter?" she said. Annie rose before her mother could answer. "I'm Annie." The woman glanced at Evelyn, then back at Annie. "Could we speak outside for a moment?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "If it's about money, you can say it in here." "I'm sick, not deaf." The woman flushed. "Mrs. Carter, I understand. It's just—" "No," Evelyn said. "You people always understand. Then you hand my child a paper." Annie touched her mother's arm. "It's okay. I'll be right outside." "It is not okay," Evelyn said, but her voice was too weak to chase Annie into the hall. The woman led Annie 3 steps away from the door, as if distance made numbers less cruel. Calvin came out behind her and leaned against the wall. "There's been a review of your mother's coverage," the woman said. "Some portions of the medication adjustment and extended observation may not be fully covered under her plan." "How much?" "We don't have the final amount yet." Annie looked at the folder. "How much do you need now?" The woman hesitated. She was not unkind. That made Annie angrier in a tired way. Kind people could still carry bad news for a system that had learned to keep its own hands clean. To keep the account in good standing, a partial payment of $2,800 would help prevent delay in processing assistance. Calvin straightened. "Processing assistance? You're asking for money so she can be considered for help?" The woman looked at him, then back at Annie. "I know how that sounds." "No," Annie said. "You know exactly how it sounds. That's why you lowered your voice." The woman's face tightened, not with offense, but with shame she had no permission to act on. "I'm sorry," Annie almost said. "Don't be. It wasn't your fault." But she was tired of protecting the feelings of people delivering harm politely. "I'll figure it out," she said. The woman handed her a sheet of paper. Annie did not look at it right away. She already knew the shape of it. Due dates, balance, patient responsibility, contact number, the language of a country that could turn fear into a form. When the woman left, Calvin whispered, "We'll call the church. My mom knows people." "Calvin, I'm serious." "So am I." Annie folded the paper once and slid it into her backpack. "People can pass a plate on Sunday. They can't pass $2,800 by tonight." Her phone buzzed before he could answer. Unknown number again. She knew. She answered anyway. "Annie," Mason Reed said, warm as a radio host. "I hope your mother is doing better. What do you want?" A small pause. "I wanted to improve our offer." Calvin mouthed no again, sharper this time. "We understand your circumstances are urgent," Mason continued. "After speaking with my review team, we can increase the purchase amount to $20,000. Annie closed her eyes. 20,000. Not enough to change a life. Enough to keep one from collapsing this week. Enough to pay the hospital, refill prescriptions, cover rent, maybe buy her mother 1 month without pretending sleep was rest. "What's the catch?" she asked. "No catch. The terms remain largely the same, with a confidentiality provision added. Standard language. You agree not to discuss the terms, valuation, or transfer process with outside parties. Why? To protect both sides. To protect you. To protect the opportunity," Mason said. Annie leaned against the wall, The hospital corridor seemed to lengthen in both directions. Do I still lose all rights? You receive immediate compensation. That wasn't what I asked. A pause. Yes. Full assignment. 10-year non-compete? Yes, but that's standard. No royalties? Annie, at this stage, royalties would be premature. No credit. Credit can be discussed after development, but the acquiring entity needs flexibility. She laughed once. It surprised even her. You want my work, my silence, and my name off the door. I want to give you $20,000 within 48 hours. My mother needs $2,800 today. Then this solves that. The sentence hung there. Not false. Not fair. That was the worst part. Mason's voice softened. Listen, Annie, I don't want you to miss this window. Your mother's condition sounds serious. A hospital doesn't wait for a teenager to become a founder. Calvin stepped toward the phone. Annie held up one hand to stop him. What happens if I don't sign? She asked. Then we wish you the best, of course. But our team moves on. And without institutional backing, legal support, or capital, Pulseroot may sit on your laptop while life keeps asking for money. He had chosen every word carefully. That did not make them less vicious. I'll call you back, she said. The deadline is 5 tomorrow, but with the revised amount, we'd need verbal confirmation by tonight. Goodbye. She ended the call and stood with the phone in her hand. Calvin stared at her. He's cornering you. He knows. Then don't let him. Annieschen. 3-8. I don't know how to save her and myself at the same time, Annie said. Calvin's face changed. He had known her since middle school, had watched her beat older kids in coding rooms, had seen teachers call her gifted like the word explained anything. He had never heard her sound that young. He lowered his voice. Maybe you're not supposed to do it alone. People keep saying that. Annie pulled the hospital paper from her backpack, then the Bright Path contract, then the 3 college envelopes. She held them all against her chest the way she had on the bench. But when it's time to sign something or pay something, my name is the one on the line. Inside the room, Evelyn called weakly, Annie? Annie wiped her face before turning. She had not realized she was crying. I'm coming, Mama. She went back in, leaving Calvin in the hall with his hands in his pockets and no argument strong enough to stand against $20,000. Evelyn watched Annie sit beside the bed. Was that the money people? One of them. Which kind? Annie looked at her mother. The kind that wants to help, Evelyn said. Or the kind that wants to own you? Annie could not answer. Evelyn closed her eyes, then opened them again. Bring me the contract. Mama, bring it. Annie took it out slowly. Evelyn reached for it, but her hand shook too much. Annie placed the pages on the blanket. The older woman looked at them for a long time, though Annie knew the print was probably blurring. You see all these words? Evelyn said. Yes. They are dressed up nice, but I know a chain when I see one. Annie pressed her lips together. I want to live, Evelyn said. Don't you dare think I don't. I want to sit in my kitchen again and complain about the neighbor's dog. I want to see you walk across a campus acting like you're not scared. I want years, baby. I do. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. But I will not buy my years with your cage. Annie bent forward, pressing her forehead to the edge of the bed. A message buzzed on her phone. Mason read, we can prepare documents tonight. 20,000, 48-hour wire. This is the best path forward. Annie stared at the words until they blurred. Then another message came in, from Calvin. Don't answer him yet. Annie placed the phone face down. For the next hour, she sat beside Evelyn while the machines kept their steady rhythm and the contract waited in her backpack like a loaded thing. She did not sign. She did not refuse. She simply stayed there, trapped between a mother who wanted her free and a world that kept naming the price. By 4 o'clock, Jonathan was back on the 27th floor of Whitmore MedTech, with the warehouse still in his clothes. He had changed neither his suit nor his expression. The scent of cardboard and cold packing gel seemed to follow him into the conference room. Where the air was filtered, the water bottles were aligned, and the long table shone under recessed lights. Richard Sloane was already there. He sat at the far end with a folder open in front of him. Silver hair neat, cufflinks straight, face calm in the way men look calm when they have spent their lives being believed. Beside him sat 2 senior attorneys, the head of pricing strategy, and Marbury from legal, who avoided Jonathan's eyes as he entered. Claire came in last and closed the door. Jonathan did not sit right away. He placed 3 stacks of paper on the table. BrightPath contracts, renal pricing summaries, distribution center scheduling reports. Richard looked at the stacks, then at Jonathan. This is excessive. Jonathan pulled out a chair and sat. That depends on what we've been calling normal. Richard leaned back. I've cleared my afternoon, so let's be precise. What exactly are you alleging? I'm not alleging yet. I'm reading. That is not an answer. It's the first honest one this company has had today. No one moved. Richard's mouth tightened. Jonathan, we acquire early-stage tools from independent developers. We price based on maturity, risk, and market readiness. We distribute medication under contracts negotiated with hospitals, insurers, and vendors. We schedule warehouse labor according to operational need. None of this is unusual. That seems to be everyone's favorite defense. Because it is true. Jonathan opened Annie's BrightPath file and slid a copy down the table. An 18-year-old girl built a predictive routing model that our own technical review says could be integrated into our supply network. BrightPath offered her $12,000, no royalties, no credit, full assignment, 10-year non-compete. Richard did not look at the file. If this is about Annie Carter, we should involve outside counsel before discussing specifics. It became about Annie Carter because she was the one I met. The files say she's not the only one. Marbury cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, from a legal standpoint, these agreements were disclosed clearly. Sellers signed voluntarily. Jonathan turned to him. Voluntarily is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Marbury's face reddened. I only mean there was no coercion. No one put a gun on the table. We just waited until there was a hospital bill, an eviction notice, a tuition deadline, or a sick parent, then called the pressure and urgency factor. Richard's voice stayed even. That phrase is used for timing, not pressure. It is used to price desperation. The head of pricing strategy shifted in his seat but said nothing. Jonathan opened another file. Malik Thompson, Cleveland. Medication adherence app, $9,000. Internal projected value after integration, $1.8 million. No counsel, no royalties. Richard glanced at the paper. Speculative. Sophia Alvarez. Fresno. Bilingual intake system. 12,000. Projected value. 3.2 million over 5 years. No counsel. No credit. Again, projection is not value. Annie Carter. Detroit. Pulse route. 12,000. Potential 7 figures. Urgency factor. Family medical debt. Jonathan looked at Richard. Her mother is upstairs at Mercy General wondering if her daughter is going to sell her future to keep treatment moving. That is tragic, Richard said. It is not a corporate policy failure. Jonathan sat back. Then let's talk policy. Claire dimmed the lights and pulled up the scheduling report. The screen showed rows of worker IDs, weekly hours, eligibility status, turnover, denied full-time requests. Jonathan pointed to the first chart. Distribution center, 72% part-time, most scheduled between 27 and 28 hours. Requests for 32 hours denied or delayed. Benefit eligibility kept below threshold. Richard's eyes flicked to the screen. Flexible labor keeps distribution costs manageable. It also allows workers who want part-time hours to have them. Did they ask for part-time? Some do. How many? Richard did not answer. Jonathan looked at Claire. She read from her tablet. In the last 18 months, 64% of part-time workers submitted at least one request for additional hours. 41% submitted more than one. Jonathan turned back to Richard. Marlene Jackson has asked 3 times. She packs renal medication and can't afford similar medication for her husband. Richard's patience thinned. You spent one afternoon at a warehouse and somehow learned more than our quarterly labor dashboard. The room went still again. Richard closed his folder. You are reacting emotionally. Yes, Jonathan said. I am. I'm also reacting to numbers. That seems to be the only language allowed in this room. Then let's use numbers. Richard sat forward. Raising warehouse hours above benefit thresholds would add millions in annual cost. Revising BrightPath contracts would reduce acquisition margins and create retroactive exposure. Reducing renal pricing for community hospitals would affect a high-margin segment that funds research and development. These are not small adjustments. They are structural disruptions. Jonathan looked at him. People are being disrupted too. They just don't show up in the same column. People are always affected by business decisions. That sentence should scare you. It should sober you. Richard's voice sharpened at last. You built this company because you understood scale. Scale requires discipline. Discipline means you cannot redesign strategy every time a sad story reaches your desk. Jonathan's eyes lifted. Richard saw the shift and pressed on. You saw one exhausted black girl in a hallway. And now you want to dismantle an entire revenue model? The words landed harder than Richard intended, not because they surprised Jonathan, but because they revealed the clean cruelty underneath everything else. One exhausted black girl, as if Annie were a distortion in the data, as if her race, her age, her fatigue, and her poverty were reasons to minimize her instead of reasons to pay closer attention. Claire looked down. Marbury stopped breathing for a second. Jonathan did not raise his voice. No, Richard. I saw what our revenue model was holding in its hand. Richard stared at him. 3 college letters, Jonathan said. A hospital bill. A contract designed to take everything she built before she had enough money to protect it. That is not a sad story reaching my desk. That is my desk reaching into her life. Richard's face hardened. That is rhetoric. No. Rhetoric is innovation with purpose on a lobby wall while we buy ideas from poor kids at panic prices. Rhetoric is delivering care where it's needed most while the people packing that care can't afford to get sick. The pricing strategist finally spoke. Sir, if we adjust renal pricing too quickly, some hospital contracts may have to be renegotiated across regions. That could affect supply continuity. Jonathan turned to her. Then prepare models that lower patient burden without interrupting supply. That will take time. Take it, but don't tell me delay is care. Richard pushed his chair back slightly. You need the board. I know. You may not have them. I know that too. And if shareholders interpret this as mismanagement? Jonathan looked at the BrightPath files. Maybe they should know what was being managed. Richard stood then. I strongly advise against taking this further without a controlled legal and communications strategy. There it is again. Controlled. Jonathan gathered Annie's file. The people under our policies don't get controlled conditions. They get deadlines. Richard buttoned his jacket. You are making a mistake. Jonathan looked at him for a long moment. No, I think I made it years ago. I'm just late seeing it. Richard walked to the door, then stopped with his hand on the handle. Sentiment does not run a billion-dollar company. Jonathan answered without looking away. Neither should shame dressed up as efficiency. The door closed behind Richard, quiet and final. No one spoke after he left. The room held the charts, the files, the cold coffee, and the kind of silence that comes when people realize a meeting has stopped being about policy and started being about who they are willing to become. Jonathan opened Annie's file again. At the top, beneath her name, BrightPath had written one sentence in the intake notes. Applicant likely to close quickly due to immediate family medical need. Jonathan stared at it until the words lost their corporate shape. Then he turned to Claire. Call an emergency board meeting. Claire made the calls from the corner of the conference room while Jonathan stayed at the table, looking at the file until the words seemed less like a report and more like evidence left at a scene. Emergency board meeting. Monday morning. Mandatory attendance. No substitutes. No prepared remarks from finance before Jonathan spoke. By 5:30, the executive floor had thinned. Assistants gathered laptops. Analysts walked past glass walls with their voices lowered. Richard Sloan had disappeared into his office and closed the door. Jonathan knew what that meant. Richard was calling allies, shaping the story, turning concern into instability and instability into a threat. Men like Richard never waited for a fight. They built the courtroom before anyone knew they had been accused. Jonathan was still reading when Claire knocked once and opened the conference room door. Her face had the look of someone deciding whether the truth would make things worse. There's a young woman downstairs asking for you, she said. Jonathan looked up. Annie Carter, Claire added. Security called me. She doesn't have an appointment. Send her up. Claire hesitated. She's upset. Send her up. A few minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Annie stepped out with her backpack over one shoulder and the 3 envelopes pressed under her arm. She had changed into jeans and a dark sweatshirt, but she looked no more rested than she had at 2 in the morning. If anything, daylight had made the exhaustion more visible. Her eyes were dry now, which was worse than tears. Tears meant something had room to move. Dry eyes meant it had been locked down. Claire led her to the conference room, then started to step inside with her. Annie stopped. I need to talk to him alone. Claire looked to Jonathan. It's all right, he said. Claire left them and closed the door. For a moment, Annie stood without speaking. She looked around the room. The long table, the screen on the wall, the leather chairs, the untouched bottles of water, the skyline beyond the glass. Jonathan watched her take in the clean quiet of the place. The room did not smell like bleach or coffee burned too long. No one was coughing behind a curtain. No one was asking for a partial payment to keep a mother's account in good standing. That was the insult of rooms like this. They made consequences feel far away. You work here? She asked. Yes. Healthcare technology, she said. That's what you called it. It is what I do. That wasn't what I asked. Jonathan accepted it. I founded Whitmore MedTech Group. Annie's face did not change at first. She had suspected money, power, influence. But suspicion and confirmation are different wounds. Her fingers tightened around the envelopes. Whitmore, she said. As in the name on the hospital wing. Yes. As in the company that owns Bright Path? Jonathan did not look away. Yes, there it was. The straight line between the hallway, the cafeteria, her mother's hospital bed, Mason Reed's phone call, and this glass room. Annie let out one breath, short and bitter. You knew. Not when I met you, but you know now. Yes. She nodded slowly, as if filing that answer somewhere she could reach later if she needed to be angry again. Then she walked to the table and began removing things from her backpack. She did it carefully, one item at a time, as if each one deserved to be seen. First, the 3 college letters. Harvard, Stanford, MIT. She laid them in a row. Then the Bright Path contract, folded at the signature page. Then the hospital payment notice from patient accounts. Then a plastic hospital bracelet with Evelyn Carter's name printed in black. Jonathan stood, but Annie raised one hand. No, sit. The command came out quiet. He sat. Annie looked at the papers on the table. This is what your innovation costs. Jonathan did not answer. He knew better than to rescue himself with language. She tapped the college letters first. These are what everyone tells me I earned. Teachers, counselors, church ladies, people who cried at graduation, like they had already seen me leave. They all said the same thing. Annie, you made it. Annie, this is your way out. Annie, don't look back. Her hand moved to the hospital bill. This is what was waiting when I looked back. Then the contract. And this is what your company offered me so I would stop being expensive to my own life. Jonathan's throat tightened. Annie, no. She looked at him then. Don't say my name like you're trying to make this personal in a softer way. It is personal. It has been personal for me since the first time my mother skipped a pill and told me she forgot. Since the first time a billing clerk told me they understood while printing another balance. Since Mason Reed said my mother didn't have the luxury of waiting. Jonathan's jaw moved, but he said nothing. He offered $20,000 now, Annie said. Added a confidentiality clause. Full rights. No royalties. No credit. 10 years where I can't build anything like my own idea. $20,000. To disappear politely. Jonathan's eyes dropped to the contract. I know. You know? Annie gave a small laugh. Of course you know. That's the part I keep forgetting. Men like Mason don't invent this kind of thing by themselves. They work inside buildings like this. For men like you, using words like opportunity. The words struck, but he let them. She had earned the right to spend them any way she needed. I wanted to help you, he said. Annie leaned both hands on the table. You wanted to pay the bill. Yes, that would help. I'm not too proud to know that. Her voice shook once, then steadied. But I didn't come here for a check. Why did you come? Because if I sign this tonight, you'll still sleep in a building with your name on it. If I don't sign it, my mother might be the one who pays first. I needed you to see that. Not in a file. Not in a memo. Here. She pushed the hospital bracelet toward him. It stopped near his hand. My mother's name, Annie said. Not patient responsibility. Not renal account. Not unpaid balance. Evelyn Carter. She worked laundry for 16 years. She cleaned sheets for people who had better insurance than she did. She told me every sick person deserves something clean to lie on. Annie swallowed. Now she's lying upstairs worried she's going to become the reason I sell myself cheap. Jonathan picked up the bracelet. It was light. That almost angered him. Something carrying that much fear should have weighed more. I read the contracts, he said, not just yours. And you're right. Annie looked almost disappointed. Maybe she had expected denial. Denial would have given her something to fight. Jonathan continued. Bright path targeted urgency. Medical debt. Tuition deadlines. Eviction notices. Family emergencies. The model priced leverage. Not just products. I saw the intake notes on you. What did they say? He hesitated. What did they say? Immediate family medical need. Likely to close quickly. Annie closed her eyes. Her face did not collapse. It hardened. They wrote that down? Yes. Like it was a coupon. Jonathan said nothing. She turned toward the window and looked down at the city. When I was little, my mother used to bring me downtown once a year to look at the big buildings. She'd point up and say, "Baby, don't be scared of tall places. Somebody has to work in them." Annie looked back at him. She never told me the tall places might be scared of people like us walking in with the truth. Jonathan stood slowly. I called an emergency board meeting. For what? To change Brightpath. To review every contract like yours. To change renal pricing for community hospitals. To address the warehouse labor policies. That sounds like a speech. It's not. It sounds like something a man says before lawyers make it smaller. Jonathan took the hit. Then hold me to it. Annie's eyes narrowed. How? Come to the meeting. She almost laughed again. Your board doesn't want to hear from me. That's why they should. I'm not your sad story. No. I'm not walking in there so they can look guilty and then vote the way they already planned. No. I'm not letting you use me to prove you have a heart. Jonathan looked at the papers between them. You would not be there for me. You would be there because every number they will argue over has lived in your house. That stopped her. He said, I can bring files, charts, pricing models, labor reports. Richard will bring risk projections and shareholder language. They'll understand all of it because it asks nothing of them except opinion. But you can tell them what their words do when they leave this room. Annie looked at her mother's bracelet near his hand. And if they don't care, then at least they won't be able to say they didn't know. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, the city moved below them, traffic lights changing for people who had no idea that one tired girl was deciding whether to stand before a boardroom that had never made room for her. Finally, Annie gathered the college letters but left the contract, the hospital notice, and the bracelet on the table. Keep those, she said. Jonathan looked down. Are you sure? No. She put the envelopes against her chest. But I'm sure they don't belong hidden in my backpack anymore. At the door, she stopped. Mr. Whitmore. It was the first time she had used his full name like that. Not with respect, with weight. Yes? If I come, I'm not asking them to save me. I know. I'm asking them to stop making girls like me choose what part of themselves to bury first. Jonathan nodded once. After she left, he remained standing beside the table. The contract waited under the lights. The hospital notice lay beside it. Evelyn Carter's bracelet curved around nothing. Claire came in quietly a minute later. Is she coming? Jonathan looked at the empty doorway. I think so, he said. Claire glanced at the papers. And if the board refuses? Jonathan touched the bracelet with 2 fingers. Then we find out what kind of company we really are. By Monday morning, the city had put on its work face. Detroit moved under a low gray sky, buses breathing at curbs, coffee shops filling with men in union jackets and women carrying tote bags and lunch containers, all of them stepping into another week because bills did not pause for conscience. On the 27th floor of Whitmore MedTech, the boardroom had been prepared before sunrise. Water bottles stood at each seat. Tablets had been loaded with financial packets. A tray of untouched pastries sat near the wall. Claire had tried to remove it, but Jonathan told her to leave it there. He wanted the room to look exactly like what it was. Comfortable people preparing to discuss uncomfortable lives. Richard Sloane arrived first, which did not surprise anyone. He wore a charcoal suit and the calm expression of a man who had spent the weekend turning facts into risk language. He greeted Claire by name, nodded to the general counsel, and placed a thin folder at his seat. not thick. That was the message. Richard wanted the board to believe this was small. Jonathan arrived 5 minutes later carrying no briefcase. In his hands were 3 things: the BrightPath contract, the hospital payment notice, and Evelyn Carter's bracelet in a clear plastic bag. The 3 college letters were tucked beneath his arm, their creases still visible. Claire saw them and said nothing. She had learned that morning not to smooth anything for him. The marks mattered. One by one, the directors entered. Margaret Ellis, former hospital system CEO, silver hair pinned back, spine straight, eyes sharp. Daniel Price, investor, impatient before he sat down. Reverend Thomas Avery, retired pastor and longtime community advisor, the only board member who still said good morning as if the words required sincerity. Linda Cho, regulatory expert. Paul Hensley, venture capital. 2 others joined by secure video from New York and Boston, their faces floating on the wall screen above the company logo. Richard waited until everyone had coffee before he spoke. Before we begin, I want to frame the issue properly. Jonathan remained standing at the head of the table. You'll have time after me. Richard's jaw tightened. I think context is important. So do I. That's why I called the meeting. Margaret looked from one man to the other. Jonathan, your notice said emergency governance matter. That is serious language. It is a serious matter. Are we facing litigation? Daniel asked. Not yet. Regulatory action? Not yet. Then what exactly is on fire? Jonathan looked at the pastries, then at the people around the table, the part of the company we stopped looking at. No one answered. A few glanced at Richard. He did not move. Jonathan placed the first document on the table. BrightPath Innovations. We acquired it 3 years ago under Whitmore Applied Systems. Since then, it has purchased over 600 software tools, predictive models, and healthcare-related intellectual property packages from independent developers. Paul Hensley leaned back. That's not new. BrightPath was reviewed in 2 previous growth meetings. Yes, Jonathan said. It was reviewed by revenue, not by consequence. He tapped the top sheet. 60% of the sellers were under 25. Most had no legal counsel. 71% were tagged internally with urgency factors: medical debt, eviction risk, tuition deadlines, family emergencies. Those urgency factors lowered purchase leverage and increased close probability. Linda Cho frowned. That phrasing came from internal notes? Yes. Jonathan slid copies down the table. Here are 3 examples. Malik Thompson from Cleveland, Sophia Alvarez from Fresno, Annie Carter from Detroit. Richard finally spoke. We should be careful naming private individuals in a board setting. Jonathan looked at him. We were not careful when we priced them. The room shifted. Reverend Avery lowered his eyes to the paper in front of him. Jonathan continued. Annie Carter is 18. She built a predictive routing model for medical supplies. Our technical intake rated it as highly promising, potentially worth 7 figures after development. BrightPath offered her $12,000 for full rights, no royalties, no credit, and a 10-year non-compete. Daniel Price looked up. Was she represented? No. Did she sign? Not yet. Then this is a pending acquisition issue, Richard said. Manageable. We can withdraw the offer, revise it, and avoid unnecessary exposure. Jonathan turned to him. That is exactly how we got here. We keep calling human beings exposure when they get close enough to tell the truth. Richard's expression hardened, but he did not interrupt. Jonathan placed the hospital payment notice beside Annie's file. Annie's mother, Evelyn Carter, is in renal failure at Detroit Mercy General. She worked hospital laundry for 16 years. Her treatment costs are one reason Annie considered signing. The intake team knew that. They wrote it down as a close factor. Margaret Ellis picked up the paper. Her face changed, just slightly. As a former hospital executive, she knew the language too well. Patient responsibility, partial payment, coverage review, assistance pending. This is from Mercy General? Yes. The same hospital as the renal wing? Yes. Daniel looked irritated. Jonathan, with respect, tragic cases exist in every healthcare system. We cannot make corporate policy based on one patient account. Jonathan placed Evelyn's bracelet on the table. It made almost no sound. This is not one patient account. He touched the next stack. Renal pricing. Over the last 3 years, our high-margin renal segment has increased revenue through distribution controls, hospital contracts, and medication pricing structures that place the heaviest burden on community hospitals and underinsured patients. Linda Cho raised a hand. Are you saying we violated pricing regulations? I'm saying legality is the lowest floor in the building, and we built a penthouse on it. Reverend Avery looked at him then. Jonathan moved to the third stack. Distribution labor. At our pharmaceutical warehouses, most workers are scheduled 27 to 28 hours weekly. Requests for full-time hours are routinely denied or delayed. Benefit eligibility is avoided by design. I visited the Detroit Distribution Center Friday. A woman named Marlene Jackson packs renal medication we sell, but cannot afford comparable medication for her husband. Richard set his folder down at last. Jonathan, this is not analysis. This is moral theater. No, Jonathan said. The theater is the lobby screen saying care through technology while the hands moving that care cannot get care themselves. Daniel sighed. What are you proposing? Jonathan did not answer yet. He looked around the room slowly, making sure no one had the comfort of pretending this was a memo they could skim. Richard took the opening. Before proposals are discussed, the board should consider fiduciary duty. BrightPath structure may need adjustment, but it remains a profitable acquisition channel. Renal pricing changes could affect revenue projections. Expanding warehouse hours and benefits would add millions in annual labor cost. We should commission a study, appoint a committee, and proceed with discipline. Discipline, Jonathan repeated. Yes, because compassion is not a business strategy. The sentence sat in the center of the room exactly as Richard intended. Clean, adult, hard to argue with if a person had trained himself not to picture faces. Jonathan picked up Annie's 3 letters and laid them on the table one by one. Harvard, Stanford, MIT. The envelopes looked out of place among board tablets and financial reports. Neither is burying children's futures under medical debt, he said. For the first time that morning, Richard looked away. Jonathan let the silence do its work. This girl should be choosing dorms, meal plans, classes. Instead, she is negotiating with a company we own over how cheaply she can sell her mind before her mother's next bill comes due. And while that happens, we sit here asking whether changing the system would cost too much. Margaret folded her hands. Does she know about this meeting? Yes. Is she willing to speak? She is in the building. That changed the room more than any document had. Daniel straightened. Linda looked toward the door. Reverend Avery closed his folder completely. Richard's voice dropped. Jonathan, bringing her in would be reckless. Jonathan looked at him. No. Reckless was building a model that depends on people being too desperate to negotiate. She is not a policy expert. No, she is what policy feels like when it leaves this room. Claire stood near the door, waiting for his signal. Jonathan looked once more at the board, at men and women who had reviewed thousands of pages in their careers, and still might not understand one tired girl unless she stood before them. He nodded to Claire. Bring her in, he said. Claire opened the boardroom door and stepped aside. Annie Carter entered with the 3 envelopes held against her chest, the same way Jonathan had first seen her in the hospital hallway. She had not dressed for the room. No blazer, no borrowed shoes, no attempt to look like the people seated around the table. She wore dark jeans, clean but worn sneakers, and the same gray hoodie from Mercy General. Her hair was pulled back, and her face carried the kind of tired that makeup could not have hidden even if she had owned any. For a moment, no one spoke. Annie looked at the table first. She saw the water bottles, the tablets, the polished wood, the pastries no one had touched. Then she saw the papers laid out in front of them. Her contract, her mother's bill, the hospital bracelet, the 3 college letters. Her life had been arranged into exhibits. Jonathan rose. Annie, thank you for coming. She glanced at him. I almost didn't. I know. Richard Sloane leaned forward slightly. Miss Carter, before you begin, I want to make clear that this board respects your privacy. Nothing said here should be understood as an admission of wrongdoing or... Richard, Jonathan said. Sloane stopped, but his expression did not soften. Annie looked at him. You're the one from finance? I'm the chief financial officer. That sounds like yes. A quiet breath moved through the room. Not laughter, something closer to discomfort. Reverend Avery gestured to the empty chair near the end of the table. Would you like to sit, young lady? Annie shook her head. No, sir. If I sit down, I might remember how tired I am. The old pastor's face changed. He understood that kind of sentence. Jonathan said, say only what you want to say. Annie looked at the board. That's the first thing men in powerful rooms get wrong. You think people like me say what we want. Most of the time we say what we can afford to say. No one interrupted. My name is Annie Carter. I'm 18. I graduated from Frederick Douglass High School last spring. I got into Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. Full tuition, not full life. People keep saying full scholarship like that solves everything. It doesn't pay rent. It doesn't pay for the rides when my mother is too weak for the bus. It doesn't pay for the medication that insurance says is covered until the bill arrives and proves it isn't. Margaret Ellis watched her closely, hands folded in front of her. Daniel Price shifted in his chair. My mother's name is Evelyn Carter. She worked laundry at Detroit Mercy General for 16 years. She washed sheets for patients whose families never knew her name. She came home smelling like bleach and told me honest work leaves a smell on you. When her kidneys started failing, she kept working until her feet swelled so bad she couldn't wear her shoes. Now she's upstairs in that hospital telling me to go to college like love is simple. Annie looked down at the envelopes in her hands. I built Pulse Route because I got tired of watching poor clinics wait for things other places had too much of. Medication expires in one building while people across town are told to come back next week. Supplies sit on shelves while patients sit in waiting rooms. I thought maybe if the system could see need before it became an emergency, fewer people would get hurt. She placed one hand on the BrightPath contract. Your company didn't ask what I dreamed of doing with it. It asked how cheaply I could be forced to give it away. Richard Sloane's mouth tightened. Miss Carter, BrightPath made an offer based on an early-stage asset. No one forced you to accept it. Annie turned to him. Did you know my mother was sick? Sloane did not answer immediately. It's in the intake notes, Jonathan said. Annie kept her eyes on Sloane. Did you know? Richard adjusted his cuff. The company considers many factors during acquisition review. That's not what I asked. The room went still. Richard said, yes. The file indicated family medical need. And that made me more likely to sign? He did not answer. Annie nodded slowly. That silence is clearer than most answers. Linda Cho looked down at the contract in front of her. Paul Hensley tapped one finger against the table, then stopped when Reverend Avery looked at him. Annie continued. Mason Reed called me and said my mother didn't have the luxury of waiting. He said it like concern. But it was a clock. He knew every hour made the contract harder to refuse. He raised the offer to $20,000, added a confidentiality clause, and kept the part where I lose all rights, all royalties, all credit, and 10 years of building anything like my own work. She looked around the table. Maybe that's legal. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just the girl you expected not to have one. Margaret's eyes lowered. Richard spoke again, controlled but sharper. I understand your frustration, but commercialization requires capital, infrastructure, regulatory oversight, and risk. Ideas do not become products by themselves. I know, Annie said. That's why I wanted to study. That's why I wanted a lab. That's why I wanted mentors who didn't see my emergency before they saw my mind. Jonathan watched the board absorb that. Some looked moved. Some looked threatened. Both reactions mattered. Daniel Price leaned forward. Miss Carter, what exactly do you want from this board? Annie looked at him, then at the hospital bracelet on the table. I want you to stop pretending this is about one contract. It isn't. If I sign, you get a product. My mother gets a month. I get a cage with nicer paperwork. If I don't sign, maybe I keep my name on my work, but I still go back to a hospital where the bill waits longer than the doctor does. She paused, and for the first time her voice nearly broke. She swallowed it back. I am not here for your pity. I am not here so Mr. Whitmore can feel like a good man. I am here because every number on your screen has a body attached to it. Sometimes that body is packing medicine in your warehouse. Sometimes it is lying in a hospital bed. Sometimes it is sitting in a hallway at 2 in the morning, holding college letters she may never use. Reverend Avery closed his eyes. Annie picked up the contract and held it where they could see it. This is not opportunity. This is what desperation looks like, after lawyers clean it up. Richard looked toward Jonathan. This is becoming inflammatory. Jonathan did not speak. Annie answered instead. No, sir. Inflammatory is when a person's kidneys fail because medicine costs too much. Inflammatory is when a girl has to calculate whether her mother can survive long enough for her to be smart the right way. Words are not the fire. They are just smoke. For the first time, Richard had no immediate reply. Jonathan stood then and turned to the board. I have more. Claire connected his tablet to the screen. The company logo disappeared, replaced by internal data. BrightPath seller demographics, purchase prices, projected valuations, urgency factors, non-compete terms, renal pricing increases, warehouse hour caps, denied full-time requests, benefit ineligibility. Jonathan spoke plainly. BrightPath disproportionately purchased from young, unrepresented developers under financial stress. Our renal pricing structure placed avoidable burden on community hospitals and underinsured patients. Our distribution centers kept workers below benefit thresholds by design. In some facilities, disciplinary flags show racial disparities significant enough to require independent review. Linda Cho sat forward. How significant? Claire answered. Preliminary review shows Black and Latino workers were flagged for attendance and attitude violations at higher rates than white workers with comparable time clock records. Margaret Ellis looked at Richard. Did finance see this? Richard's face had gone still. These are preliminary correlations, not conclusions. Jonathan said, then we will get conclusions. Richard turned toward the board. Before anyone reacts, I strongly caution against making structural commitments based on emotional testimony and incomplete analysis. Annie looked at him. You keep calling me emotional like I should be embarrassed. My mother is sick. My work was underpriced. My future is on this table. If I wasn't emotional, that would mean something in me had died already. Reverend Avery opened his eyes. Amen. The word was quiet, but it changed the room. Jonathan looked at the directors one by one. Richard is right about one thing. This is structural. That is exactly why it requires more than a corrected offer to one girl. Annie stepped back from the table. Her hands were shaking now, so she folded them together. I said what I came to say, she said. Margaret stood. Miss Carter. Annie stopped. The former hospital CEO's voice was low. Thank you for making us uncomfortable. Annie looked at her for a moment. Don't thank me for that. Do something with it. Then she turned and walked out. Claire followed her into the hall, but Jonathan stayed in the boardroom. No one reached for the pastries. No one checked a phone. The contract lay where Annie had left it, no longer a business document. Not in that room. It was a mirror, and every person at the table had been made to look. The door closed behind Annie, but the room did not return to what it had been. Something had shifted in the air, and no one knew how to move without admitting they had felt it. Richard Sloan was the first to recover. He reached for his folder, tapped the pages into alignment, and gave the board the expression he used when markets dipped, and people needed to be reminded that panic was expensive. She is impressive, he said. No one is disputing that. But we cannot confuse moral discomfort with governance. Reverend Avery looked at him. Sometimes governance could use a little moral discomfort. Daniel Price rubbed his forehead. Let's stay focused. Jonathan, what exactly are you asking us to approve? Jonathan had been standing since Annie left. He had watched the door for a few seconds longer than necessary, thinking of the way she held herself together until the hallway took her. Now he turned back to the table. 4 immediate changes, he said. Richard's eyes narrowed. Immediate? Yes. Jonathan touched the first folder. 1. Every warehouse employee in our distribution network, who wants a minimum of 32 hours a week, will be offered it. No more 27.5-hour scheduling designed to keep people below benefit eligibility. Claire sent the document to the board tablets. Screens lit up along the table. 2. Jonathan continued. Minimum wage across all Whitmore distribution and warehouse operations increases to $21 an hour. Daniel sat back. That is a major cost increase. It is a major correction. Correction is not a budget category. No. But turnover is. Injury is. Absenteeism is. Training replacements every 8 months is. We've been paying for this already. We just hid the bill in other columns. Margaret Ellis looked down at the preliminary labor report. There is truth in that. Burnout is expensive. Hospitals learned that the hard way. Richard cut in. 3. Jonathan turned another page. Basic healthcare coverage for every employee after 60 days, regardless of part-time classification. Paul Hensley gave a low whistle. Regardless? Yes. That will raise expectations across every subsidiary. It should. And 4? Linda Cho asked. An employee support fund that covers childcare assistance, family medical leave support, and emergency hardship grants, plus an independent worker council with elected employee representatives from every major facility. They will review scheduling, safety, discipline patterns, and benefit access quarterly. Richard closed his eyes for half a second, as if patience itself had become a physical burden. You are proposing to rewrite the employment structure of a national healthcare technology company because of a warehouse visit and a teenager's testimony. Jonathan looked at him. No. I'm proposing we stop calling a rigged structure efficient. Daniel tapped the tablet. What's the annual cost? Claire answered before Jonathan could. Initial estimate is between 28 and 34 million, depending on enrollment and uptake. The number landed. Even Reverend Avery lowered his eyes. Richard seized it. There it is. $34 million before we even discuss renal pricing or BrightPath liabilities. That is not a gesture. That is a material shift. Jonathan nodded. Good. Then it is large enough to matter. Richard turned to the board. You all understand what is happening. Jonathan is asking you to approve a package with no full actuarial review, no shareholder communication strategy, and incomplete legal exposure analysis. If we move this fast, we invite lawsuits, investor backlash, and internal chaos. Margaret looked at Jonathan. He's not wrong about process. I'm not asking to skip process, Jonathan said. I'm asking to stop using process as anesthesia. Linda Cho leaned forward. What about BrightPath? Jonathan picked up Annie's contract. BrightPath's current acquisition model is suspended today. All pending contracts involving developers under 25 without independent counsel are frozen. All past contracts from the last 5 years will be reviewed by outside counsel for fairness, coercive pressure, and valuation disparity. Where terms were abusive, we renegotiate. Richard laughed once, short and humorless. Renegotiate after assignment? That is legally unnecessary. So was calling a sick mother an urgency factor. No one came to Richard's defense. Jonathan continued. Going forward. No buyout from an unrepresented individual developer. No non-compete longer than 2 years without independent review. No confidentiality clause designed to hide valuation. Revenue sharing becomes the default for early-stage innovations that we develop commercially, and original creators receive credit unless they choose otherwise. Linda nodded slowly. That may actually reduce litigation risk long-term. Richard looked at her. It may also reduce acquisition margins. Some margins deserve reducing, Margaret said. Richard turned sharply. That is easy to say until earnings guidance is missed. Reverend Avery folded his hands. Earnings guidance is not scripture, Richard. A quiet tension moved through the room. Jonathan placed another document on the table. Renal pricing. We start with community hospitals and underinsured patient programs. Within 30 days, pricing strategy will produce a model that lowers patient burden for critical renal medications and supplies without disrupting supply continuity. Within 60 days, we publish a patient access framework. Daniel frowned. Publish? Yes. Publicly? Yes. That invites scrutiny. Jonathan looked at him. We need scrutiny. Richard stood. This is reckless. Jonathan did not sit. No. Reckless was letting a system run because it was profitable and defensible. Reckless was believing that if harm came wrapped in contracts and coverage language, it stopped being harm. Richard's face hardened. You are putting this company at risk. Jonathan picked up Evelyn Carter's bracelet. This company has been putting other people at risk for years. We just called it theirs. The room fell silent again. Outside the glass, Detroit moved below them. Traffic flowing around construction cones. Buses stopping. People carrying lunch bags and work boots and medical appointments. From the 27th floor, the city looked quiet. Jonathan knew now that quiet was not peace. Sometimes quiet was just exhaustion without a microphone. Margaret Ellis spoke first. I will support a vote to authorize the labor changes, bright path suspension, independent review, and renal pricing framework, provided implementation teams report weekly for the first 90 days. Linda Cho said, I'll support it with compliance oversight, independent of finance. Reverend Avery nodded. I support it. And I want one seat on that worker council advisory group held for a community representative. Daniel Price looked irritated, then tired. I don't like the speed, but I like less the idea of explaining why we waited. Paul Hensley exhaled. Shareholders will hate it. Jonathan looked at him. Paul shrugged. They'll hate it less if it works. Richard remained standing. This is a mistake. If you push this through, you will trigger a confidence crisis. Jonathan met his eyes. Maybe confidence in the wrong thing needed a crisis. Richard gathered his folder. Then you should also accept my resignation. Jonathan did not blink. No. The board looked up. Richard paused. No? No resignation package. No quiet exit. You are suspended pending independent review of Bright Path acquisition practices, renal pricing decisions, and labor cost strategies. Your access is revoked at the end of this meeting. For the first time all morning, Richard looked surprised. You can't be serious. I am. You're making me the villain. No, Jonathan said. I'm making you accountable. There's a difference. Richard looked around the table, waiting for someone to object. No one did. Margaret looked at her tablet. Linda took notes. Reverend Avery watched him with sadness, not sympathy. Richard straightened his jacket. You'll regret this. Jonathan thought of Annie's hands shaking around those envelopes. Not as much as I regret signing things I didn't read closely enough. Richard left the room without another word. The vote happened 15 minutes later. It was not unanimous, but it passed. The board approved the reform package, the independent investigations, the Bright Path suspension, the renal pricing framework, and the creation of the Evelyn Carter Medical Scholarship Fund for low-income students entering biomedical engineering, public health, and medical technology. When the meeting ended, no one applauded. Applause would have been too easy. Claire stayed behind as the directors filed out. Annie is still downstairs, she said. She didn't leave. Jonathan looked at the contract on the table. Did she ask what happened? No. She said she'd wait. He nodded, gathering the 3 college envelopes carefully. Downstairs, Annie sat in the lobby near a window, back straight, hands folded around a paper coffee cup she had not touched. She stood when she saw him. Well, she asked. Jonathan stopped a few feet away. He did not smile. This was not a happy ending yet. The Bright Path contract is frozen. You will not sign it. Not that version. Not with those terms. Your mother's treatment will be moved into a reduced cost access program while the pricing review is completed. And if you choose to develop Pulse Route with us, you keep ownership, credit, counsel, and a fair revenue structure. Annie stared at him. That's a lot of words. Yes. What do they mean? They mean you don't have to sell yourself cheap to buy your mother time. Her face tightened. For a second, he thought she might cry. She did not. She looked down at the cup, then back at him. And the people in the warehouse? Jonathan felt the question like a test he deserved. 32 hours if they want them. $21 an hour. Healthcare after 60 days. Childcare and medical leave support. A worker council with real access. Annie nodded once, slowly. Good. That was all. No thank you. No smile for his conscience. Just one word, given not as gratitude, but as judgment passed for the moment. Jonathan accepted it. Annie picked up her backpack. I need to tell my mother. He handed her the 3 envelopes. You should take these. She held them carefully this time, not crushed against her chest, but flat in both hands. At the elevator, she turned back. Mr. Whitmore? Yes? Don't let them make it smaller after I leave. He thought of Richard, the board, the shareholders, the lawyers already preparing softer language. I won't. Annie looked at him for one more second, deciding whether to believe him. Then the elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside carrying the letters like something that might finally become real. By the time September came, the trees on campus had started to turn at the edges, not fully gold yet, but close enough to remind Annie Carter that the world could change slowly and still change. She stood beneath an old maple outside the biomedical engineering building with a backpack on one shoulder, a campus map folded in her hand, and 3 minutes before her first lecture. For most students crossing the lawn, it was just another Monday morning. They carried coffee, laptops, water bottles, earbuds, and the easy impatience of people late for something ordinary. Annie watched them for a moment and tried to teach her body that nothing was wrong. No monitor was beeping, no nurse was calling her name, no billing clerk was lowering her voice in a hallway. No contract waited in her backpack with a signature line sharp enough to cut off 10 years of her life. She looked down at the sleeve of her new university jacket. It still felt strange, wearing the name of a place she had once thought belonged to other people. Her mother had cried when the package came in the mail. Not loud crying. Evelyn Carter did not believe in wasting breath. She had held the jacket in both hands, rubbed the fabric between her fingers, and said, "Look at that. My baby got a school with weight on it." Annie had laughed. "Mama, it's just a jacket." "No, it is not. Poor people say just when they are scared to claim something." Now, standing on campus, Annie heard that sentence again and straightened. Her phone buzzed. A video call from home. She answered at once. Evelyn's face filled the screen, thinner than Annie wanted, but clearer than it had been in months. She was sitting near the kitchen window back in Detroit, wrapped in a blue cardigan, a cup of tea on the table beside her. Mrs. Wilkes could be heard somewhere off camera telling someone on the phone that no, she did not want a new internet plan, and yes, she knew how to hang up. "You made it to the building?" Evelyn asked. "I'm standing outside." "Why outside?" "I'm early." "Annie Carter, you are never early unless you are nervous." Annie smiled. "Maybe a little." "You eat?" "Yes." "What?" "A banana." "That is not breakfast. That is a warning." "Mama, I have class. And I have kidney disease. We both busy. Answer the question next time with something that touched a stove." Annie laughed, and a student passing by glanced at her, then smiled without knowing why. Evelyn leaned closer to the screen. "You listen to me," she said. "You walk in there like you paid for your seat." "I didn't." "You paid plenty. Not with money, with nights, with fear, with every hour you stayed awake when children your age were supposed to be dreaming. Don't you dare sit small." Annie's throat tightened. "How are you feeling?" "Stable." That is the word Dr. Morrison likes. I like it too. Stable sounds like a chair that won't break. "You took your medication?" "Yes, ma'am," Evelyn said, giving the title back with a little grin. "And before you ask, Mrs. Wilkes is taking me to dialysis later." Calvin's mama brought soup, the kind with actual chicken in it, not the ghost of chicken. Annie looked toward the building doors. Students were going in now. Her life was moving, and for once, it was not moving away from her mother. "I'm tired," Annie admitted. Evelyn's eyes softened. "Bad tired?" Annie looked at the campus, the brick walkways, the students, the glass doors waiting for her. "No, the good kind." Evelyn nodded once, as if she had been waiting all her life to hear that. "Then go be tired for something that gives back." Annie ended the call and stood still for one breath longer. Then she walked into the building. Inside her backpack, beside a notebook and 2 used textbooks, was a folder for Pulse Route. Not a surrender contract, not a buyout. A development agreement reviewed by an independent attorney who had explained every page twice because Annie asked him to, and because this time no one punished her for wanting to understand. Her name was on the project as founder. Her ownership was intact. Her future revenue was protected. The first pilot would begin with community clinics in Wayne County before the end of the year. She found the lecture hall and took a seat in the second row, not the back, not the place people chose when they wanted to disappear. When the professor walked in and began talking about systems biology, Annie opened her notebook. On the first page, in her mother's careful handwriting, was a sentence Evelyn had written the night before Annie left Detroit. "Don't shrink your dream to fit someone else's mercy." Annie touched the words once, then began to write. In Detroit, Jonathan Whitmore stood in his office looking down at the city through the floor-to-ceiling glass he had once mistaken for perspective. On his desk, the old order of things had changed. The earnings reports were still there. So were legal updates, implementation schedules, and letters from shareholders, some supportive, some angry enough to sound personally betrayed by the idea of warehouse workers receiving health care. But beside those reports lay a different stack. The first list of students awarded the Evelyn Carter Medical Scholarship, a wage implementation report from the distribution centers, the names of workers who had elected representatives to the new council, and a handwritten note from Marlene Jackson. My husband picked up his medication without choosing between that and the light bill. I thought you should know what numbers look like at home. Jonathan had read that line 6 times. Claire entered with a folder. Board follow-up is at 2. Legal says the Bright Path review will take longer than expected. Let it. Richard Sloane's attorney sent another letter. Add it to the pile. Claire hesitated. Annie's first pulse route update came in. Jonathan turned. She flagged a supply delay affecting 2 clinics on the east side. The system rerouted inventory from an overstocked facility before it became a shortage. Doctor, Morrison said 3 patients avoided rescheduling treatment. Jonathan looked out at Detroit again. 3 patients. Not a market segment. Not a line item. 3 people who did not have to wait because a girl who almost sold her mind for $20,000 had been given room to build. Send Annie my congratulations, he said. Claire nodded. From you personally? Jonathan thought about that. No. From the project team. She doesn't need me standing in the doorway of every good thing. Claire smiled faintly. Understood. That evening, after the meetings ended and the building emptied into the dark, Jonathan did not go home. He drove himself to Detroit Mercy General and parked in the visitor lot. The hospital looked the same from outside. Glass doors, ambulance bay, tired families moving in and out under white lights. Inside, the hallway on the 3rd floor was quieter than it had been that night. The same plastic bench sat near the wall. Jonathan stood in front of it for a long time. Then he sat down. The bench was colder than he expected. Harder, too. He placed one hand on the plastic surface and thought of Annie asleep there, holding Harvard, Stanford, and MIT like a person holding the last dry matches in a flood. He thought of Evelyn asking who had priced her daughter's mind against her body. He thought of Richard saying compassion was not a business strategy. He thought of all the years he had believed that if his name was on the wall, he was already helping. A nurse passed and recognized him, but she did not stop. He was grateful for that. For once, he was not there as a donor. He was there as a man learning the difference between being generous and being responsible. Weeks later, Annie would receive a plain envelope from Whitmore MedTech's community office. Inside was not a check, not a speech, not a photograph for publicity. It was a copy of the first annual report from the Worker Council and Scholarship Fund. On the last page, someone had highlighted a line from the summary. 17 students enrolled. 43 patients received renal medication support. 812 warehouse workers moved above the benefits threshold. Annie read the numbers at her dorm room desk while rain tapped against the window. Then she folded the report and placed it beside her mother's note. Her roommate asked, "Good news?" Annie looked at the page, then at the textbook open in front of her, then at the campus lights outside. "Not finished," she said, "but good." That night, she called Evelyn before bed. They talked about class, soup, dialysis, Mrs. Wilkes arguing with the pharmacy, and whether Annie had bought a real breakfast yet. Nothing dramatic, nothing worthy of a headline. Just the ordinary conversation of a mother and daughter who had been given back enough time to talk about ordinary things. And sometimes, that is what justice sounds like. Not a speech, not applause, not a billionaire saving a girl, just a young woman turning a page in a college textbook while her mother sleeps safely 200 miles away. And a company finally learning that the value of medicine is not measured by how high the stock climbs, but by how many dreams no longer have to be buried beneath a hospital bill. The lesson of this story is that kindness is not enough when injustice is built into the system. A single check can help one person for a moment, but real compassion asks why that person was trapped in the first place. Annie's story reminds us that talent can exist anywhere, but opportunity often depends on whether someone is seen, protected, and treated fairly. It also shows that power means responsibility. When people in high places finally listen to those who suffer beneath their decisions, justice can begin not as charity, but as change. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.